Tyrion Lannister stood on the dock at White Harbor, shoulders hunched against the chill wind rolling off the bight. His breath formed ghostly plumes before his face as he stared over the dark waters, alone beneath the twilight sky. The cold bit through his layers of fine wool and fur, as if it resented him, resented his name, his history, and every betrayal he had ever committed. And yet, to his own surprise, he had never felt so strangely free. Free from King's Landing, free from the intrigues of the Red Keep and the endless backstabbing among his family and enemies alike. Those days lay behind him, for good or ill. He had slipped the city with but a handful of loyal retainers, then lost half of them to desertion along the way until only Podrick Payne had remained. But even Podrick had departed once they reached a small port on the eastern coast of Westeros. The boy was too honorable in truth or too frightened to follow Tyrion's path of treason to the crown. Tyrion couldn't blame him. Loyalty to a Lannister, especially one suspected of murdering his own father, wasn't the most advantageous arrangement. Tyrion had let Pod go with a shrug and a smile, even as something in his chest ached at the loss of that one steadfast presence. Then Tyrion had continued north alone, paying off a merchant ship's captain with the last of his gold to ferry him, incognito, to White Harbor. Now he inhaled slowly that crisp, salt-tinged northern air and began the trek from the waterfront into the city proper. The city was quieter than the great southern ports, less raucous, more subdued. Lantern light flickered behind shuttered windows, illuminating small swirls of snow that occasionally gusted through the lanes. A hush lingered in the darkening streets, reminiscent of a constant, held breath. These northerners were watchful. They'd always been slow to welcome southerners, but their wariness had no doubt doubled after all the unrest. Word traveled quickly even to places like White Harbor, the War of the Five Kings, the Red Wedding, the Lannisters who had hammered the North into submission. Tyrion was well aware that of all the places he could have fled, this might be the last where he'd find an easy welcome. Yet he had not come for an easy welcome. He had come to bend his mind, his resources, and whatever cunning he still possessed to a new cause, the cause of the North. He had tired of propping up a regime ruled by fear, illusions, and the manipulations of a family that barely tolerated his existence. He could scarcely believe it himself that he would willingly walk into a lion's den of fierce northerners who saw him as little better than a murderer of their king, Ned Stark. But perhaps, if the fates were kind, they might see him for who he was, a dwarf with more wit than height, a battered conscience, and the seeds of a plan that might, in time, benefit them all. He found a modest inn, nondescript at the edge of a cramped, cobbled lane. It had no name over the door, only a sign with a worn depiction of a harbor seal. Once inside, the heat of a small fire in the hearth enveloped him in that smoky, comforting warmth. A few patrons sat in wooden chairs close to the flames, but no one paid him much mind. A short, broad-faced woman stood behind the counter, watching him with raised brows. He forced a smile, though it felt stiff on his lips. "I'll need a room for the night," Tyrion said. His voice echoed softly in the hush. "An ale, something to wash the dust of the road from my throat." The woman nodded once. "Got coin for it?" "Some," Tyrion admitted, patting the small pouch at his belt. "Not as much as I'd like, but enough." He tried for a disarming laugh, but it came out sounding weak. She shrugged. "That'll do." She reached beneath the counter for a small clay pitcher. "You pay for a cup of ale, you can take the pitcher. As for a room, half a stag for the night." Tyrion handed over the coin, took the pitcher, and made his way to a corner of the room. He avoided the chairs near the hearth where the locals warmed themselves, choosing instead a small table in the shadowed recess of a far corner. He sipped his ale slowly, thinking. The inn was quiet, and beneath the muffled hum of conversation and the crackle of the fire, his mind buzzed with the tension of this new plan. Months ago, he had started to question every assumption he held dear. Tywin's death had been the first blow, one that had severed Tyrion's fragile tether to the Lannister seat of power. Cersei's hatred for him had never been a secret, but with Tywin gone, Tyrion had known she would do anything to ensure he was out of the way. Jaime's stance, torn as always between brotherly affection and family duty, had never been enough to protect Tyrion. He could have fled across the sea, disappearing into the sprawl of Essos. But word had reached him of the rumors swirling about Daenerys Targaryen, she of the dragons, forging an army across the narrow sea. Varys had once planted a seed in Tyrion's head that perhaps this Targaryen queen might be the realm's best hope against Cersei. But Tyrion couldn't quell a strange, unexpected pull toward the north. Something in him whispered that the real war was not in King's Landing or Meereen, but somewhere else entirely. Perhaps it was the memory of Jon Snow, the bastard boy of Ned Stark, who had seemed honorable enough even in their brief meeting. Perhaps it was curiosity about the rumored White Walkers. Or maybe Tyrion simply needed to do something that might, for once, not reek of Lannister cunning and self-preservation. And so he had reached White Harbor, the seat of House Manderly, aware that this was the North's largest port and thus an entry point that might give him access to those still loyal to the Stark name. He wondered how much time he had before the crowned Cersei heard of his whereabouts. Not long, likely. Word would drift south eventually. Tyrion would need to move quickly. He finished his ale, feeling the dull ache of exhaustion settling in his bones. His eyelids felt weighted with lead, yet his mind refused to still. He rose and climbed the narrow stairs to the small room he had rented. It was cramped and a bit drafty, but after laying his cloak across the bed, he decided it would suffice. At least no one would try to slit his throat in the night here. That was the hope, anyway. Sleep came in fits. He tossed and turned, haunted by the memory of Shay's betrayal, the presence of Tywin's corpse on that privy, and the stinging glare of Cersei in the throne room, ghosts of the past swirling in the darkness. But eventually, the cold and exhaustion caught up to him, and he drifted off. By first light, Tyrion rose to find a light dusting of snow had fallen outside. The sky was a bright, iron gray. He pulled on his boots, belted on the dagger that hung at his hip, and descended to the main room. The innkeep barely glanced at him as he left. Her disinterest, ironically, was the best he could have hoped for. No questions, no fanfare. He made his way into the heart of White Harbor. The city was slowly rousing, and the air carried a sharper tang of fish, brine, and morning chill. Merchants opened their stalls along the pier, fishermen unloaded their catches, and the hum of conversation grew with each minute. Tyrion scanned faces, searching for any sign of the Manderly Guard or some official presence. He spotted a man wearing the Merman sigil on his cloak, presumably a soldier from House Manderly. Approaching a soldier directly and demanding audience with Lord Wyman Manderly might be a poor choice, but Tyrion saw no alternative. He needed to speak with someone who could lead him to the seat of power in the North. He had no illusions that the North was united. The Boltons now claimed dominion over Winterfell, but Tyrion had heard rumors that not all houses bowed willingly to Roose and Ramsay. He also knew that House Manderly had historically been loyal to the Starks. Perhaps loyalty still smoldered in the corners of their hearts. Tyrion approached the soldier carefully, mindful to keep his hands visible, as short as they were. "Good morning," he said, his breath clouded. "You are in the service of Lord Wyman Manderly, I take it?" The soldier looked down at him with the guarded expression typical of a Northman addressing a stranger. Tyrion did not see overt hostility, though. The soldier nodded once. "Aye. And who asks?" Tyrion took a breath. "I am Tyrion of House Lannister," he said, bracing himself for the recoil. The soldier's lips parted in surprise, and his grip on the hilt of his sword tightened. Tyrion quickly raised his hand. "I mean no harm. Quite the opposite, in fact. I've come with a proposal for Lord Manderly. I would speak with him at his earliest convenience." The soldier's eyes narrowed. "A Lannister? Here? You'd not find an easy welcome, dwarf." Despite the harsh tone, Tyrion noticed the soldier hadn't drawn the blade. "Not yet. Your family was sworn to the crown that murdered Robb Stark, that betrayed the North and brought ruin on many houses. You've some gall showing yourself so freely." Tyrion nodded, swallowing. "The Lannisters did indeed do terrible things, but I am not my father. I come alone and unarmed in terms of retinue. Lord Manderly might find interest in what I have to say. How do I know you aren't here to sow further betrayals? If betrayal were my aim, I'd hardly stride up to a Manderly soldier in the middle of White Harbor and announce my identity," Tyrion replied with a small, wry smile. "I'd be skulking in shadows, waiting to strike some underhanded deal. No, my good man, I have come openly to seek an audience. If Lord Manderly wishes to throw me into a cell, I suppose he can. But at least let me offer him my words first. Words are wind, as some say, but occasionally they can shift the tide of events." It was something in the soldier's eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or that faint flicker of puzzlement that made Tyrion think he might be heard. After a long moment, the soldier jerked his head. "Very well. You'll come with me. But you'll surrender your dagger." Tyrion did so without protest. The soldier tucked it into his belt, eyeing Tyrion as if he expected some last-minute trick. When nothing happened, he motioned for Tyrion to follow. They made their way through the streets toward the looming bulk of Newcastle, the manderly seat within White Harbor's walls. The fortress was solid and gray, perched near the water with walls that had seen centuries pass. Guards stood at the gate, and their stares sharpened when they saw Tyrion. Whispers flickered among them as the soldier who'd escorted him explained the situation. Before long, Tyrion found himself ushered through echoing corridors and up a winding set of stairs into a modest receiving chamber with high, narrow windows overlooking the harbor. Their Lord Wyman Manderly awaited him. The lord was as large a man as rumor suggested, broad-chested and heavy with a thick white beard. He was seated in a tall-backed chair, flanked by two younger men, likely his kin or trusted knights. His face betrayed neither immediate anger nor welcome. He merely studied Tyrion with an unreadable gaze as the guards set themselves against the walls. Tyrion bowed stiffly, his dwarf's body making the motion awkward. "My Lord Manderly, I appreciate you granting me this audience on such short notice. I am Tyrion Lannister." Lord Manderly leaned forward, the chair creaking beneath his weight. "I know who you are," he said quietly. "You are the imp killer of your father Tywin Lannister, rumored slayer of King Joffrey, though I'm none too certain on the truth of that. You appeared in my city unannounced after all the North has suffered at your family's hands. Give me one reason I should not have you hanged from the battlements as a show of defiance to Cersei Lannister." Tyrion spread his hands in a gesture of supplication. "Because I no longer serve the Iron Throne. Because my father's shadow no longer darkens my path, though it haunts me still. Because I have information and cunning that might prove valuable to the North. You see, my lord, while my family sits the throne, I am certain the realm will sink further into chaos. The North deserves better. If you'll grant me a chance, I can help pave a different way forward." He paused, gauging Manderly's reaction. The big man's face was still, but not cold. He beckoned Tyrion closer. "What do you know of the North's plight, dwarf? The Boltons hold Winterfell, all but allied with the Lannisters. The Starks are scattered or dead. My own house bleeds from war, and you think you can fix this? A single Lannister, cast out by his own kin." Tyrion lowered his gaze, then looked Manderly in the eye. "I don't promise miracles, but I know many secrets of King's Landing, who pulls the strings, who might be swayed. And I have reason to believe the true threat is not Cersei, or even the Boltons, but something far more frightening beyond the wall. I've heard rumors, glimpses, from certain sources. The White Walkers are real. If the realm continues to tear itself apart, these creatures from legend may well have a clear path south. If that happens, all our petty squabbles will matter for naught." One of the men beside Manderly muttered angrily, "White Walkers, children's tales." But Manderly raised a hand for silence. His eyes flickered with an intensity that told Tyrion there was more than skepticism stirring within him. Perhaps Manderly had heard other rumors, too. "You come with talk of an ancient threat and the downfall of your own family's rule. Why would I trust such claims?" "Because I have no future in the Lannister fold," Tyrion replied. "I'm a fugitive from the Iron Throne, in case you haven't heard. I've nowhere else to turn but north. I'd rather the realm have a chance of surviving the winter to come than see it ground under my sister's heel or devoured by these undead legends. You may throw me in your darkest cell if it suits you, but I ask you to consider that an unlikely ally might be of greater use alive than rotting away beneath your castle." For a long moment, Manderly said nothing. The silence stretched. Tyrion's heart thudded in his chest. He was unarmed, in a fortress that had every reason to despise him, pleading his case to a lord who could end him with a single order. Yet Tyrion had no real regrets about placing himself in this predicament. The game had to be played. At last, Manderly sighed heavily. "They say you have a sharp wit, dwarf. Some even claim you tried to rule King's Landing justly as hand, before your father returned. I never had the pleasure of meeting you then, though I heard rumors you kept the city from tearing itself apart when Stannis attacked." "I did my best," Tyrion allowed. Manderly gestured to the men beside him. "Leave us. Keep guards on the door, but let me speak with the dwarf alone." Both men cast uncertain glances at their lord, but they bowed and departed. Once the door closed, Manderly fixed Tyrion with a more direct look. "Now speak plainly. I have reason to believe the rumors of these White Walkers are not mere children's stories. There was a time when I dismissed such talk, but the ravens from the wall have grown increasingly distressed. I hear tidings of dead men walking and the Night's Watch calling for aid. You say you're here to help the North. How? Tyrion took a breath. I know that the Boltons will never inspire the true loyalties of the Northern Lords, not after what happened at the Red Wedding. And I suspect that House Stark, though battered, may yet have living heirs who can be rallied behind. If so, the North can unify without the Boltons at its head. You need support from the Southern Lords, or at least from powerful allies, to fend off the Iron Throne's wrath. I can broker alliances. I can feed you information about King's Landing. Even among the Lannisters, there are those who quietly despise Cersei. They might be persuaded to turn a blind eye to certain northern maneuvers. Lord Manderly's jaw tightened. You want me to rebel against the crown openly? Again, after so many men have died? Would it be rebellion? Tyrion asked softly. Or liberation? If the Boltons were removed, if a Stark reclaimed Winterfell, might that not unify the North in time to face the threat beyond the Wall? I can't speak for the hearts of every Northern Lord, but I know enough of your people's pride to suspect they will not bow easily to the Boltons. The big man grunted. True enough. Roose Bolton might be cunning, but his bastard Ramsay is a monster. Many in the North despise him. Yet toppling the Boltons could be a fool's errand without the backing of lords who hold more men. Some remain frightened or scattered. Some bent the knee to the Boltons after the Red Wedding left them no other choice. Tyrion nodded. The situation is dire, but dire situations call for resourceful measures. If you can gather the scattered loyalties of the North under one banner, and if word spreads that a true Stark might claim Winterfell, that might rally the region faster than any threat or bribe. As for the Iron Throne, Cersei is fixated on her own power base. If you move swiftly, she'll learn of your intentions far too late to send an army north. Besides, from what I know, King's Landing is not in prime condition to raise a massive host. The realm is bankrupt, the Tyrell alliance is in shreds, and the Crown's hold on the Stormlands is tenuous. She can't rely on the phrase, they're despised, and they've lost influence after the war. The North is far away. In short, my lord, you have a window of opportunity. A narrow one, but it exists. Manderly's expression shifted slightly. Tyrion could almost see the wheels turning behind his eyes. And what do you gain from this? A measure of redemption, Tyrion admitted, feeling the sting of the word on his tongue. And perhaps a place to stand when winter comes for us all. The Lannisters will surely kill me if I ever attempt to return to King's Landing. I have no illusions of regaining a seat of power in the South. I only hope to use what I know to help the North protect itself, and by extension, protect the realm from the threat that most Southerners refuse to believe in. If, in so doing, I manage to salvage a shred of my own humanity, so be it. He let those words hang in the chilled air. Manderly rubbed a hand over his broad face, exhaling slowly. You are either the best liar I have ever met or a broken man seeking some final chance at meaning. I will not decide your fate this moment. You will remain my guest here at Newcastle. You'll be watched closely, but I will hear you out in the coming days. Perhaps we can test your claims. If you speak truly, it might be that we have a common cause. Tyrion felt a knot of tension loosen in his chest. He bowed. Thank you, my lord. Don't thank me yet, Manderly cautioned. You may find the North is not so quick to forgive. But for now, I'll not hand you over to the Boltons. I'll keep your presence quiet so no ravens fly to King's Landing. We have enough trouble without drawing the Crown's immediate ire. He made a small gesture, and the guards at the door re-entered. Show him to a secure chamber. He is not a prisoner, but do not let him wander freely. Provide him meals and see that he's not mistreated. The guards nodded. Tyrion glanced at Manderly one last time, offering a dip of his head in gratitude, then followed them out of the chamber. Though it might sound strange, a wave of relief spread through him. He had taken the first, most dangerous step, revealing himself to a powerful northern lord. And he still lived. That was more than he might have expected. He was taken to a small chamber near the cass. Please outer wall. The window overlooked the harbor, and though it was cramped and sparse, it was far from the worst cell Tyrion had occupied. A single bed, a table, a chamber pot. At least they hadn't thrown him in the dungeon. The guards posted themselves outside the door, which Tyrion found both reassuring. He was under Manderly's protection, presumably, and stifling. He yearned for a decent glass of wine and a good book. But for now, he would bide his time and wait for the next move in this precarious game. Days passed in a blur of half-guarded freedoms. Tyrion was allowed brief walks in the courtyard, always accompanied by at least 2 manderly men. He had short exchanges with a few of them, gleaning scraps of information. He learned that the Boltons were indeed at Winterfell, that rumors persisted of a missing Stark boy who might be alive, that some of the northern houses were stirring with quiet dissatisfaction. Tyrion also gathered that Lord Manderly was as shrewd as he was large, carefully concealing his motives until he was certain of the path forward. A week after Tyrion's arrival, Manderly summoned him to a private council chamber. There, Tyrion found not only Manderly, but also a man of perhaps 30 years, tall and ruddy-bearded, and an older woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair. They introduced themselves as Robert Glover and Barbary Dustin, heads of their respective houses, both known to hold complicated feelings toward the Boltons. Their gazes flicked over Tyrion with undisguised suspicion. Manderly explained that he had confided in them about Tyrion's presence, trusting their discretion and counsel. Tyrion bowed politely, taking his seat at the table. He felt their scrutiny like a tangible weight. "So," Barbary Dustin said in a low voice, "this is the imp we've heard so much about. I recall hearing you played some part in Ned Stark's downfall. How do we know you don't come to finish the North off?" Tyrion cleared his throat. "Lady Dustin, if I had possessed the power to single-handedly bring down Ned Stark, I'd have boasted of it to my father. In truth, I had no hand in that tragedy. I was as shocked as anyone when Joffrey ordered his execution. I was a prisoner of Catelyn Stark at the time in the Vale. My family's role in the war that followed is regrettable, but I cannot claim the blame for that one execution." Robert Glover let out a quiet snort. "Convenient, but words are easy." Tyrion inclined his head. "True. All I can offer is my mind, my knowledge. If the North truly wants to cast off the Boltons, it will need Southern support or, at the very least, Southern disinterest. I can help orchestrate that. Consider me a tool, if you will, to help shape events. Once the North is under the banner of a Stark, you'll have unity. Then you can turn your attention to what truly threatens us all." Manderly spoke next. "The question remains, is there indeed a living Stark who can rally the North? We hear rumors, but nothing concrete. Sansa Stark was wed to Tyrion at some point, but she vanished. Some say she's in the Eyrie. Others claim she's in the Wind. Arya Stark was rumored dead, though Freys once claimed to have a Stark girl. Bran and Rickon Stark were said to have been murdered by Theon Greyjoy, but that's uncertain. Jon Snow is a bastard, and now he's Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, which forbids him from taking up arms in the realm's wars. So the question stands, who do we rally behind? Silence thickened in the chamber. Tyrion resisted the urge to shift in his seat. The truth was, he had no simple answer. If none of Ned Stark's trueborn children remained, Sansa, Arya, Bran, or Rickon, then the North's unifying symbol might have to be something else. But he suspected at least one or two of them were alive, scattered. Sansa's disappearance had always struck him as orchestrated. But where was she? All I can say, Tyrion replied carefully, is that the Boltons do not have the loyalty of the entire North. If evidence of a surviving Stark surfaces, I'm certain the tide would turn swiftly. If none can be found, you might consider forging an alliance with Jon Snow. Bastard or not, he's the son of Ned Stark, raised here in the North, and the Night's Watch is no normal political institution. In a crisis of survival, ancient vows might be bent, especially when the threat from beyond the wall grows. The walkers won't care about a man's parentage. Barbary Dustin's lips twisted. Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell. That would be quite the turn. But as you say, these are desperate times. Robert Glover rubbed his beard. It's said the boy has some measure of respect among Northerners who met him. Better a Stark bastard than a Bolton, that's certain. Manderly nodded slowly. Yet, if we call the bastard from the wall, the Boltons will interpret it as open rebellion. We'd need to be prepared for war. And if the rumored threat from beyond the wall is real, We might not have time to fight a war against Boltons and dead men both. Tyrion tapped a finger on the tabletop. That's why I propose a swift, surgical stroke. Quietly gather your loyal forces, find others who despise the Boltons, and strike before Ramsay and his father can muster their own allies. Once you hold Winterfell, the North will rally. And if, as you say, the threat from the wall is imminent, then you can fortify the North under a single banner. Let me help ensure that the Iron Throne cannot react in time to reinforce the Boltons. Lady Dustin arched a brow, her eyes flickering with something like grudging fascination. You certainly think like a Lannister, even if you claim not to be one anymore. I am a Lannister by blood, Tyrion said softly, but I'm not your enemy. The best I can do for redemption is to aid you in reclaiming what was lost. They continued to speak at length, measuring each other's words, dissecting potential strategies. In the end, while neither Glover nor Dustin swore any oath of cooperation, they left the chamber with thoughtful expressions. Manderly, for his part, asked Tyrion to remain in White Harbor a while longer. There were messages to be sent and ravens to be flown discreetly to certain northern houses. Tyrion would see little of these moves firsthand, for Manderly still did not fully trust him. But the sense of building momentum, of slow, careful plotting, swirled in the halls of Newcastle. Guards whispered, servants hurried about, and tension rode on the cold air. From Tyrion's vantage point within these walls, he watched events unfold by subtle degrees. He would be summoned now and again to speak with Manderly or one of his kin, always behind closed doors. They would pry for information about southern politics, about Cersei's temperament, about the condition of the Lannister armies. Tyrion answered as honestly as he could, knowing that trust earned was trust that might give him a place in their cause. And so Tyrion found himself an unlikely conspirator in a northern rebellion, forging alliances with people who had every reason to want him dead. Each night, before he fell asleep in that cramped chamber with the harbor wind rattling the shutters, he wondered if he had finally lost his mind. But he would remember the twisted mask of cruelty on Joffrey's face or the cunning smirk on Cersei's lips, and he would reaffirm to himself that his choice, dangerous though it was, remained the only path he could stomach. Time in the north passed with a measured slowness. Winter crept ever closer and the days shortened. Snowstorms blew in from the sea, covering White Harbor in fresh layers of white. Ships in the harbor decreased as the season advanced, though a few determined vessels still came to trade. The air grew bracing, always carrying that cold promise of a longer, harsher winter to come. In private, Lord Manderly revealed to Tyrion that he had reached out to certain houses believed sympathetic to the Old Stark cause, the Mormonts, the Serwins, the Tallhearts, and scattered clans in the mountains. There was news that Jon Snow, the new Lord Commander, had indeed sent pleas for aid to every corner of the realm, warning of the undead. Little had come of it yet, but the letters were real. Manderly looked grim as he told Tyrion these things, as if even he found the news hard to credit. But he believed in precaution. Better to prepare, he would say, than to be caught napping like a summer fool. Tyrion could only agree. Nights were spent in restless thought, occasionally in conversation with the few who dared speak to him as more than a prisoner guest. Some guards were curious about the imp's knowledge of dragons and Targaryens, since rumors had trickled even here about Daenerys Targaryen's conquests in the east. Tyrion, ironically, knew little firsthand. He had never met Daenerys. He only recounted bits he'd learned from Varys or from whispered court gossip about dragons and Unsullied, about a queen forging her own path across the sea. He found that some in the north were more intrigued than fearful. A Targaryen might be a southern ruler, but not a Lannister. And if she truly had dragons, that might prove a vital asset against the White Walkers if she could be convinced to fly north. Tyrion offered no certainty, only the possibility that Daenerys might one day cross the narrow sea to claim the throne. And if the North was already in open defiance of that throne, perhaps that might open a door to alliance. It was a delicate tapestry of what-ifs and speculations. One evening, as Tyrion paced in the castle courtyard, accompanied by guards, of course, he considered the precarious future. If the North rose up too soon, the Boltons might crush them with the help of southern allies. If they rose up too late, the White Walkers might descend before the North could unify. He worried that any plan required an element of luck. Still, this was the path he had chosen. At least he was doing something to stand against the creeping horrors of the realm. To remain in King's Landing, watching his family strangle the kingdom for their own gains, would have been a fate worse than death. Here, he might do some good before the snows fell thick around him. He exhaled, watching his breath dissipate. Yes, well, he murmured softly to himself, let it not be said that Tyrion Lannister died without a cause. The guard beside him eyed him confused but said nothing. Tyrion shook his head, gave the man a wan smile, and continued walking. He felt strangely at peace in that moment. He was still an outsider in a land that had every reason to hate him, but the swirl of courtly deceits in King's Landing was gone. The gloom of the coming winter felt cleaner, more honest than the perfumed corruption of the Red Keep. Perhaps that was all Tyrion had ever wanted, a place to belong, or at least a place he could serve without shame. Another fortnight went by. Whispers drifted of developments in the north. Men loyal to the Boltons had quarreled with hidden rebels. Lord Manderly received coded missives in the night, disappearing into his chambers to read them before returning with an air of grim determination. Tyrion was left largely out of the loop on the details, but he could sense the tension thickening like a storm cloud ready to break. Finally, word arrived that the Boltons had discovered a potential conspiracy among certain vassals. Ramsay had sent threatening letters to suspected houses, vowing dire punishments if they did not declare their fealty. The danger grew more acute by the day. Tyrion soon found himself summoned to a secret council in a windowless chamber deep in the castle. Torches flickered on the rough stone walls, casting dancing shadows. Around a large table sat Lord Manderly, Robert Glover, Barbary Dustin, and a handful of other northern lords Tyrion did not immediately recognize, likely heads of smaller houses or their trusted bannermen. They spoke in hushed, urgent voices. The Boltons knew something was amiss, though they might not know the full extent. They had begun rallying men at Winterfell. Lord Manderly had quietly mustered as many warriors as he could in White Harbor, but launching an offensive alone would be suicide. The assembled lords debated the best course, wait for a more opportune moment, or strike first to catch the Boltons off balance. Tyrion listened for a time, then cleared his throat. You say the Boltons grow suspicious. That means every day you wait might give them a chance to crush the houses they suspect before you unify. Perhaps speed is essential now. A Lord Tyrion did not know, a tall man with a hawkish nose, retorted, speed may lead us into a trap. If they're forewarned, we'll march to our own ruin. Tyrion shrugged. True. Yet from what you've told me, you can't wait much longer. If the Boltons pick off your allies piece by piece, the effort to reclaim Winterfell might die before it begins. Roose Bolton is cunning, he knows how to eliminate threats quietly. And if you do nothing, your houses may soon bow out of fear or desperation. Then your cause is finished. Silence fell. Robert Glover exchanged a glance with Manderly. Lady Dustin sipped wine from a wooden cup, her gaze unreadable. At length Manderly spoke. The dwarf is correct. We cannot linger indefinitely, or the Boltons will isolate us. My men are as ready as they'll ever be. We have arms, and the harbor remains open for at least another few weeks before ice grows thick. But what of the others who have yet to commit fully? We need them to rise in concert with us if we are to stand a chance. A younger lord, wearing a look of determination tempered by fear, said quietly, we'll have our men. My house is small, but we've not forgotten the Starks. My father died fighting for Robb. We'll not kneel to the flayers again. Tyrion's mind whirred, recalling the position of houses on the maps he'd studied. You must coordinate. Send riders to each house that has sworn to your cause, urging them to gather at an agreed location. From there, you can march on Winterfell together or lay siege if need be. The advantage of winter is that it makes supply lines difficult for large armies. The Boltons may have more men, but sustaining them in the cold is no small task. If you strike swiftly with the element of surprise, you might catch them unprepared. Lady Dustin fixed Tyrion with a sharp look. You speak as though you're a seasoned commander. He gave a self-deprecating smile. Not at all. Merely a man who's seen a siege or two in his day. I helped defend King's Landing against Stannis Baratheon. The city would have fallen but for a bit of cunning and wildfire. I doubt you have wildfire, but cunning might still be in abundance here. Manderly's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. Cunning indeed. Very well. It seems we must commit to action. The time for dithering is past. Each day we risk discovery. He turned to the others. Let us finalize our strategy. We call our banners under the cover of darkness. Summon them to meet near the crossroads by the river, 2 days' ride from Winterfell. From there we converge and strike. Once Winterfell is taken, we hold it as the seat of the North, in the name of the Starks. Then we send a raven to the Night's Watch, urging Jon Snow to come south and lend legitimacy to our cause. If we can persuade him to break his vows, that is. If not, we look to find Sansa or Arya, if they still live. The important thing is to remove the Boltons and unify the North before it's too late. No one raised an objection. Tension pulsed in the torchlight, but an unspoken agreement bound them all. Tyrion felt his heart quicken. This was treason to the crown, to be sure, yet he found himself rooting for their success. The Boltons were abominations, and the North deserved better. If it also meant a chance for him to help blunt the chaos that might sweep across the realm, so be it. Perhaps, in time, he might even find a place here. That was a dim hope, but a hope nonetheless. They ironed out the logistical details for the rest of the evening. Tyrion offered occasional pointers, little bits of knowledge gleaned from the war's various maneuvers. He stressed the importance of forging alliances with any northern houses still wavering. Fear of the Boltons was potent, but the promise of avenging Ned and Robb Stark might be even stronger. By the time the council ended, the participants dispersed with grave expressions. The next few days would be critical. Manderly asked Tyrion to remain quietly in Newcastle, out of sight, for his own safety. If the Boltons were indeed sending scouts or spies, a glimpse of Tyrion Lannister in White Harbor would confirm suspicions of treachery. Tyrion agreed readily. Stealth was, after all, part of their advantage. So while lords and knights departed under cover of darkness, summoning their sworn swords, Tyrion stayed behind, pacing the fortress halls. He could practically feel the swirling momentum of an oncoming storm. When the houses rallied and marched, the Bolton response would be swift and merciless. If Manderly and his allies faltered, Tyrion had little doubt they would be destroyed. He wondered if his sister in King's Landing would receive word of this rebellion before it truly took hold, and how she might react. But he took comfort in the knowledge that Cersei's focus was likely on her own immediate troubles, and that the distance to the north was great. Even if she wanted to send an army, it would not arrive in time for the opening clash. A week after the council, white flakes drifted in earnest from the steel-gray sky. The harbor waters grew choppy and the moored ships clanked against the docks with hollow thuds. Tyrion stood by a window in the castle's upper corridors, watching a column of men in manderly colors march out of the gate, disappearing into the swirling snow. The final wave of forces heading for the rendezvous point near Winterfell. He had done what he could, placed the pieces on the board, but now it was up to fate and the resilience of the northern spirit. He heard footsteps and turned to see Wyman Manderly himself, flanked by a single guard. The lord looked imposing in a thick fur cloak, though there were dark circles under his eyes. He paused beside Tyrion, gazing out the window at the fading column of troops. For a moment, neither spoke. At last Manderly broke the silence in a quiet voice. "I have made my choice, dwarf. If the gods are kind, we'll see Winterfell free of Bolton rule. And if the gods are cruel, we'll see White Harbor burn. Either way, this is the road we travel." Tyrion nodded. "It takes courage to choose the uncertain path. But if you succeed, the North may stand a chance against the greater darkness." Manderly sighed. "You have served our cause with your counsel. I'd never have expected such from a Lannister, but war makes for strange bedfellows. In time, if we hold the day, you might find more acceptance here. For now, remain within my halls, remain discreet. Should we be victorious, I'll send for you. We'll need to discuss the next steps, persuading the rest of the realm to leave the North to its own business, preparing for winter and the walkers." Tyrion inclined his head. "I'll do as you command, my lord." A small, wry smile ghosted across Manderly's lips. Not often a Lannister calls a Manderly my lord with such humility. These truly are strange times. "Very well, Tyrion Lannister. May the gods grant us both good fortune." He turned and departed, footsteps echoing on the stone. Tyrion remained by the window, watching the last hints of marching men dissolve into the swirling white. A sense of foreboding mingled with a flicker of hope. Everything was in motion now, no turning back. The story of the North End, House Stark, of House Bolton and House Lannister, was on the precipice of a new chapter, and Tyrion had placed himself squarely in the midst of it. Days passed in anxious stillness. Tyrion gleaned scraps of news from servants and the occasional messenger who arrived, half-frozen, to deliver urgent tidings to Manderly's keep. The Boltons had mobilized a force to sally out from Winterfell, seeking to intercept the rebellious lords. Then more raven messages. Fighting near the hills north of the King's Road. A small skirmish, inconclusive. Tyrion paced restlessly, keen to be of use, but there was little more he could do. The dice had been thrown. At night, he dreamed of old battles, of the battle of the Blackwater, of the flames and the screams. He dreamed of Shay's face twisted in betrayal, of his father's final glare. But he also dreamed of a great white wolf, eyes red as blood, stalking the snow-swept corridors of a ruined castle. Perhaps it was a sign, or just a reflection of his own anxieties. Either way, he always woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding. On the 10th day after Manderly's departure, just as Tyrion was settling for another sleepless night, a commotion arose in the courtyard below. He peered out to see gates thrown open, men rushing with torches. At first, he couldn't tell if it was friend or foe arriving. Then he spotted the Merman sigil on a tattered banner and realized it was Manderly's returning men. In the swirl of confusion, Tyrion slipped on his cloak and crept down to the courtyard, flanked by the guard that rarely left his side. All around him, soldiers panted, some splashed with blood, others nursing wounds. The smell of sweat and iron lingered in the cold air. Lord Wyman Manderly himself arrived on horseback, sliding down with a grimace as his boots hit the ground. His face was pale, but his eyes blazed. Tyrion hurried closer, ignoring the scowls of a few guards who still disliked his presence. Manderly didn't seem to mind him approaching. "My lord, are you victorious?" Tyrion asked quietly, heart thudding. Manderly took a moment to breathe, then nodded, his thick beard quivering with the motion. "We have taken Winterfell," he said, voice raw with exhaustion. "Roose Bolton is dead. Ramsay, well, we think he fled into the night or was trampled in the chaos. Some say the bastards with him turned on him. Hard to be sure, but the Bolton's grip is broken. The northern lords who marched with me and Glover and Dustin, along with others who joined us near the keep, overwhelmed their defenses." Tyrion felt a wave of astonishment. It had worked, then. The rebellion had succeeded in retaking Winterfell. He almost dared not believe it. Truly? Then the North is free. Manderly grimaced. Free as can be, given the times. The fighting was fierce. Many good men lost. We hold the castle, but we must secure our position and find a Stark to seat there. We've sent riders to the wall, urging Jon Snow to come. We'll see if he breaks his vows. If not, we keep searching for any sign of the younger Starks. Tyrion nodded, feeling a strange surge of relief. The Boltons, or at least their immediate threat, had been neutralized. And what of the Crown's response? If word reaches King's Landing, your position might be precarious. A weary smile tugged at Manderly's mouth. A risk we must take. The realm is in chaos already. Cersei's power is not what it once was. If we stand united in the north, even she may not dare to march an army through the snows. Winter is upon us. The Lannisters would freeze before they neared Moat Cailin if they could even gather enough men to try. This is the north. We endure. Tyrion breathed out. Indeed, the north was vast, its winters brutal. A southern army could find itself shattered by the elements alone. Perhaps the timing of this uprising had been fortuitous indeed. Manderly placed a heavy hand on Tyrion's shoulder. "You have played your part, though my people may never fully trust you. Still, I owe you some thanks. That's why, if you wish, I offer you leave to travel north to Winterfell with me when the time comes. Or you may remain here in White Harbor. You risk your life either way should a Lannister host ever come. The choice is yours." Tyrion hesitated. The thought of setting foot in Winterfell, seat of the family his father had helped destroy, filled him with conflicting emotions. Yet part of him wanted to see the old castle that was so central to the North's identity to stand in a place where perhaps, just perhaps, a new unity might be forged against the horrors beyond the wall. "I'll go with you," he said, surprising even himself with the firmness in his voice. "I'd like to lend what help I can to ensure the North stands strong in the days ahead." Manderly let out a tired chuckle. "So be it. I will rest my men for a few days, then we ride. The castle is large and still in need of repairs, and the lords are holding council there. Lady Dustin remains behind to ensure the dread fort does not rise again, but many others have gathered. Winterfell has always been the heart of the North." Tyrion stepped back, making room as servants hurried to assist wounded soldiers. He felt a pang of sorrow at the sight of the injured, the cost of war plainly etched on their faces. Yet among them a sense of triumph glimmered. Even the weary expressions seemed underpinned by a subdued pride. They had reclaimed their ancestral seat from traitors and butchers. That night, Tyrion found sleep elusive once more, but for different reasons. He was consumed by the knowledge that something momentous had occurred, an event that might shake the realm in ways Cersei had never anticipated. The North was forging its own path again. For better or worse, Tyrion had tied his fate to that path. He wondered if it would lead to salvation or doom. True to Manderly's word, after a few days of rest, a smaller contingent departed White Harbor for Winterfell. Tyrion rode alongside them, mounted on a sturdy Garin that was about the right size for his stature. Though he was still dwarfed by the tall Northmen, at least he could ride with less awkwardness. Snow layered the roads, and the frigid wind bit at every inch of exposed skin. Tyrion's face was numb, but he pressed on, cloak wrapped tight about him. He recalled the mild winters of the South. This was a different world altogether. Yet something about the stark beauty of the North entranced him. The endless white expanses, the quiet that stretched for miles, broken only by the crunch of hooves and the distant caw of crows. They reached Winterfell near dusk on the fourth day. Smoke rose from the chimneys, and from afar, Tyrion could see torches lining the walls. The scars of the recent battle were evident. Collapsed sections of the outer wall still being repaired, scorched timbers and bodies, Bolton's soldiers or perhaps their allies, laid out for burial or burning. But the Stark banners once again flew over the ramparts, the dire wolf of gray on white, and Tyrion's throat tightened with emotion he didn't fully comprehend. House Stark had suffered so much, yet here was a glimmer of resurrection. He doubted the ghosts of Ned, Catelyn, and Robb could ever rest easy, but at least their home was no longer in the hands of their murderers. Tyrion entered the courtyard alongside Manderly. Other lords were gathered. Glover, some Serwyn men, a knot of Mormont warriors led by a fierce-looking woman who eyed Tyrion suspiciously. He overheard bits of conversation about those who'd fallen in battle, about rumored sightings of Ramsay in the woods, about how to fix the collapsed roof of the Great Hall. The sense of forging a new beginning filled the cold air. A hush fell as Tyrion dismounted. More than a few sets of eyes landed on him with curiosity, some with open hostility. This was not unexpected. He offered a slight bow to the gathered lords. "My congratulations on your victory. I grieve for your losses, and I hope that Winterfell might soon be restored to its rightful glory." A tall, weathered man stepped forward. Tyrion recognized him as Lord Glover. Well, you stand in Winterfell as a Lannister. That alone is an odd sight." Manderly interjected. "He's here as my guest. More than that, he offered valuable counsel that aided our cause. Judge him as you will, but I stand by his right to be here." Murmurs rippled. The Mormont woman snorted, crossing her arms, but she did not openly object. Others seemed content to let it pass. The Northmen had bigger concerns, evidently. Tyrion breathed a silent sigh of relief. One angry voice might have ended him on the spot. Night settled quickly. Tyrion found lodging in a small chamber near the second-floor gallery. The castle was partially in ruins. Theon Greyjoy's men had burned parts of it, and the Boltons had never fully repaired it. Torches flickered in drafty hallways, casting long shadows. Yet even in its battered state, Winterfell felt steeped in history in an ancient and quiet strength. Over the next several days, Tyrion observed the swirl of activity. The northern lords convened daily in the Great Hall, roof now hastily patched, to discuss the next steps. Rebuilding the castle, distributing food stores, fortifying the walls for winter. The biggest question, unspoken but looming, remained: who would rule here? Rumors said a raven had arrived from the Night's Watch. Jon Snow had responded with caution, citing his vows. Yet the letter hinted at trouble on the wall, an attack from the undead, sightings of whites, the need for more men. Tyrion heard scraps of this news from a Glover soldier who had glimpsed the raven. If the White Walkers were truly on the march, then time was short. One late afternoon, when the sun hung low and pale in the sky, Tyrion found himself alone in the Godwood, wandering beneath the snow-dusted branches of ancient trees. The heart tree, a great weirwood, stood silent with its carved face weeping red sap. Tyrion had heard many a story of the old gods, though he'd never truly understood the worship. The hush here felt profound, as if the forest itself remembered centuries of northern blood and tradition. He approached the weirwood, gloved hands clasped behind his back. For a moment, he simply stood there, lost in thought. He spoke softly, though no one was there to hear. "I wonder, old gods, if you can see into men's hearts. If so, you'd know that I've come here without malice, that I mean to help your people survive the winter's wrath." He paused, feeling somewhat foolish for speaking to a tree. But the eyes carved into the bark seemed to peer right through him. "I doubt you care about my name or my birth. Only what I might do." A voice came from behind him. "Talking to the trees is not something I expected of a Lannister." He turned to see a woman with auburn hair, cloaked in gray fur. For a moment, he thought it might be a ghost of Catelyn Stark, but no, she was younger, sharper-featured. "Lady Sansa," he whispered in astonishment. She drew closer, her eyes wary. Indeed, it was Sansa Stark, older than when he'd last seen her, her face touched by sorrow but also strength. She studied Tyrion with a mixture of caution and something else, perhaps faint recognition of the man who had once been forced to wed her in King's Landing. "They said you were here," she said quietly. "I almost didn't believe it." Tyrion found himself momentarily at a loss for words. He bowed awkwardly. "My lady, I am surprised to see you. Word was that you vanished from the city, that you might be in the Eyrie." Her lips pressed together. "I was. Then I fled again, and I've been on the run from the Boltons. I ended up here when they retook Winterfell." She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the heart tree. "I heard you played no part in my father's death or Joffrey's cruelty. You were always kind to me, as much as you could be, despite the circumstances." Her voice was laced with memory, both bitter and hesitant. "Is it true you've come to help the North?" Tyrion nodded. "Yes. I left King's Landing. I couldn't abide by my family's tyranny any longer. I sought out Lord Manderly, hoping my knowledge of southern politics would aid the North. I had no idea you were here. Or alive. I'm relieved you are, truly." She studied him for a long moment, the wind brushing strands of hair across her face. "You should know I blame your family for many wrongs. But I remember you tried to protect me when Joffrey tormented me. You never touched me against my will. And I see the North is free of the Boltons, at least for now. Perhaps your presence here has served some good." "Thank you, my lady," Tyrion said softly. "I know trust is not something easily granted after all you've endured. But if there's any way I can further help you or the North, you have but to ask." She let out a small, trembling breath. "All my life, I wanted to be home. Now I am, and it's damaged. But it's still Winterfell. I want to restore my family's seat, Tyrion. I want to see the North united in truth, not just in battle. And I fear what the coming winter will bring." Tyrion glanced at the weirwood's face, the red sap tears glistening. "You and all the North are wise to fear. The threat is real, beyond the wall. We must prepare. If that means forging alliances, I will do whatever I can." She nodded, stepping closer, her voice steadier. "I came here to pray and think. My brother Jon might come south to help us if the threat from the undead becomes undeniable. The lords here talk of crowning him king in the North, bastard or not, if no other Stark heir can or will take the seat. But I'm still here. I'm a Stark and the rightful lady of Winterfell." Her eyes flickered with determination. "I'm tired of being a pawn in others' games. If Jon won't claim lordship, perhaps I will. The North needs a Stark, and I've learned much since I was a frightened girl in King's Landing." Something in Tyrion stirred at her words, admiration, perhaps, for the girl who had grown into a resolute woman. "I believe you would do well to lead, Lady Sansa. The North will see Ned Stark's spirit in you. And if I might be so bold, perhaps Jon's presence and your own leadership could work in tandem, unity at a time when your house needs every loyal sword." She studied him again, then her gaze softened minutely. "You speak with reason. I will consider it. For now, we must fix what can be fixed here, build up stores, prepare for the worst. The lords who've rallied here are waiting for some sign of direction. I intend to give it." Tyrion dipped his head respectfully. "They will follow you, my lady. You are the daughter of Ned and Catelyn Stark. Winterfell is yours by right." She nodded, looking up at the weirwood's pale bark. Silence lingered between them, deep and reverent. Tyrion felt that he was bearing witness to something sacred, Sansa Stark in the seat of her ancestors, finding the steel in her spine to guide her people. This was no naive girl enthralled by southern pageantry. This was a woman shaped by loss, betrayal, and perseverance. At length, she turned back to Tyrion. "I'm glad we spoke," she said quietly. "Though we were wed once by the orders of monsters, I know you never chose that. If we are to stand against what comes, we need all the allies we can gather. Even if you are a Lannister, you've proven you can be trusted to an extent." He gave a wry smile. "High praise indeed, my lady. I'll endeavor to increase that measure of trust over time." She allowed the faintest smile in return, then stepped away. The swirl of snow caught in her fur cloak as she walked toward the castle proper, leaving Tyrion alone beneath the heart tree once again. He stared at the carved face in the bark, feeling a rush of unexpected emotion. Here stood Sansa Stark, stronger than the illusions of King's Landing, on the cusp of taking up her rightful place. Perhaps the North would endure. Perhaps, against all odds, they would repel both the Bolton menace and the undead threat. A small part of Tyrion wanted to see that future. More than that, he wanted to help shape it. He stayed there a while, contemplating. If Daenerys Targaryen reached Westeros eventually, would she come as friend or foe to the North? Could a new alliance be forged, or would the continent tear itself apart further? So many unknowns. But for now, the North had thrown off the Lannister-approved tyrants. That was a start, a spark of hope in the long night. As dusk deepened, Tyrion made his way back through the silent godwood paths, footsteps crunching on fresh snow. His breath clouded before him, and in that dim hush, he thought he heard a whisper on the wind, the faint murmur of old spirits in old trees. Perhaps it was only his imagination. Yet he could not shake the sense that, for the first time in his life, he was part of something larger than the petty squabbles of southern courts. A true battle for survival loomed, and he, Tyrion Lannister, had chosen a side that once would have seemed impossible. He had defected to the North long before Daenerys Targaryen could land with her dragons. Whatever consequences awaited, he would stand by this choice. And so winter crept nearer, each day shorter than the last, each night colder. Yet within the halls of Winterfell, within the hearts of those who had reclaimed it, a stubborn ember of defiance glowed. Tyrion saw it in the determined faces of men and women who'd lost much but refused to yield. He saw it in Lord Manderly's booming resolve, in Lady Mormont's fierce stares, in the quiet pride of Robert Glover. Most of all, he saw it in Sansa Stark, who had endured horrors beyond measure yet stood tall beneath the dire wolf banners. They would face the cold, the White Walkers, and the storms of politics. If the realm was to be saved, it would start here, in the battered seat of House Stark. And Tyrion, once scorned as the imp in King's Landing, found an odd solace in that. In the biting wind and snow, he felt more awake, more alive than ever before. He was no hero, no warrior, but he was free to be himself, to lend his wit and cunning to a cause that might outlive the tragedies of the past. Should Daenerys one day arrive, breathing dragon fire, they would cross that bridge when they came to it. For now, the North was poised on the brink of a new dawn or a deeper night. Tyrion would do everything in his power to guide it toward the dawn. So he lingered in Winterfell, forging tenuous bonds with once enemies, poring over accounts of stored grain, offering insight into the ways of southern courts. He found purpose in tasks that once would have seemed beneath him. He shared cups of ale with battered soldiers, listened to their stories of the war, expressed empathy for their losses. Though some could not look at him without recalling the name Lannister, others began to see him as simply Tyrion, a man who'd turned his back on a hated family to stand with the North. Day by day, the gloom lifted a fraction from the castle. Repairs continued, men patrolled the walls, the ravens flew to the watch, to other northern enclaves, and across the swirling snows, rumors carried word that Winterfell once again belonged to the Starks. And while the winter winds howled at the gates, Tyrion found a kernel of hope in this battered, frigid stronghold. He had defected to the North before Daenerys arrived. Whatever the Targaryen queen might bring in her wake, fire or salvation, Tyrion prayed it would not come at the cost of the fragile unity blossoming here. As the days crept on and Sansa Stark walked the corridors with a dignity her mother would have been proud of, Tyrion began to believe that, at last, he had chosen rightly. Far from the southern intrigues and the toxic shadow of his own kin, Tyrion Lannister stood for the first time on the side of the truly living. And he would see them through the gathering darkness or die trying. The days in Winterfell settled into a tense, steady rhythm. Word of the castle's reclamation had spread, carried by riders and whispers alike, and soon there was little doubt that the Boltons' hold on the North had been shattered. Some of the smaller houses, cowed by years of fear, had begun sending envoys northward, hesitant but hopeful that the age of flayed skins and brutal tortures might truly be at an end. Others still kept their distance, no doubt waiting to see if this new turn of events would spark the wrath of the Iron Throne. But winter pressed ever closer, and food supplies, shelter, and unity began to matter more than any oaths once forced by steel and terror. Tyrion watched the North as it tried to knit itself back together. He stood on the ramparts one morning, fur cloak drawn tight, gazing over the courtyard below. Servants hauled wood for repairs, stonemasons chipped away at damaged walls, and blacksmiths hammered swords and arrowheads in preparation for battles yet to come. It was a far cry from King's Landing's perfumed intrigues. Here, survival was not guaranteed by gold and titles, it was wrested from cold earth and harsh winds. Tyrion felt a certain grim admiration for these people, so different from the southerners he had known all his life. When he descended the steps, he came upon a knot of northern soldiers in the yard, practicing with blunted swords. Their breath hung in the air, and the dull clang of metal on metal carried through the crisp morning. He paused, watching. These men did not stand in neat lines or perform showy maneuvers for spectacle. Their swordsmanship was rough-hewn, born of the need to stay alive in a land where the slightest misstep in winter could mean death. One soldier, a younger man with a fresh scar on his cheek, caught Tyrion's eye and offered a curt nod. Tyrion nodded back, recalling that the man had nearly lost his life in the battle to retake Winterfell. Scars were the currency of experience here. He made his way toward the Great Hall, which still bore signs of recent restoration. Fresh timbers braced the ceiling, new rushes covered floors scorched by Greyjoy fires. Inside, a constant bustle of activity swirled. Lord Manderly and some half-dozen other lords were taking breakfast at a long table, discussing everything from grain storage to the best ways of patrolling the roads now infested with outlaws and stray Bolton men. Sansa Stark often presided over these gatherings, though she was not yet fully recognized as the Lady of Winterfell in an official sense. The lords had grown used to her presence and her calm, measured voice. What began as deference to her name had blossomed into something else, respect for her clarity of mind. Tyrion found her at the high table, standing beside Robert Glover and a tall, spare man from House Serwyn who was reading a raven's message. Wyman Manderly sat close, occupying an entire bench with his formidable girth. Sansa looked up as Tyrion approached. "My lady," Tyrion said softly, bowing his head in greeting. "Any tidings?" "News from the east," she replied, lifting her gaze from the parchment. "House Serwyn has had success convincing some smaller clans to join us. Their word is that more men are willing to fight for Winterfell if it ensures protection from roving bands loyal to the flayed man." Glover's thick beard twitched with satisfaction. "They've seen what Ramsay was capable of. There's little love left for the Boltons. And now that Roose is dead, many fear the bastard could still be prowling the countryside." Tyrion's face grew solemn. "Have any new sightings of Ramsay been confirmed, or is he just a ghost story now?" Sansa's eyes flickered with a trace of the old terror she must have felt under his power, but her voice remained firm. "No confirmations. Some claim to have seen a man with his sigil near the Wolfswood, others near the Bar Rowlands, still others swear he's riding south in the guise of a common sellsword. Possibly all rumor. Possibly not. Regardless, we must be ready." Manderly rumbled a low agreement. "Should the bastard show his face, we'll deal with him. It's the least we owe our dead." The conversation turned to practical concerns. House Manderly's provisioning of the castle's larders, the state of the stables, repairs to the keep's central tower. Tyrion listened attentively, offering a small suggestion here or there about supply lines, gleaned from his experience running King's Landing during the War of the Five Kings. He could see the skepticism in some of the Northmen's eyes. They remembered that a Lannister had once starved them by blockade or threat, or that Tywin Lannister's gold had funded the Freys and Boltons in their treachery. Yet Tyrion sensed that day by day, his presence had become less of a lightning rod. He spoke plainly, gave useful counsel, and never tried to supplant the authority of the Northern Lords. While no one offered him warm embraces, the open hostility had cooled. When at last the meeting ended, Sansa beckoned Tyrion aside. She led him out of the hall into one of Winterfell's half-repaired corridors, candlelight dancing in small alcoves. A servant hurried past with a stack of freshly cleaned linens. Another carried a load of new arrow shafts, steps echoing on stone. It was not until they reached a quieter corner that Sansa turned to speak. "You mentioned something a few days ago," she said quietly, keeping her voice low to avoid eavesdroppers, "about the possibility of forging alliances outside the north if we can get word to certain key figures in the south who are no friends of my sister-in-law, the Queen." The corner of Tyrion's mouth twitched at that phrase, Queen, meaning Cersei Lannister. "Yes, though I cannot say for certain who might be bold enough to defy her openly. The Tyrells have been gravely weakened, but they loathe my sister. The Dornish have their own grudges. The Stormlands are in chaos. Many lords pay lip service to the throne, but few truly support Cersei's reign. The truth is, the realm rots from within." She studied him as if trying to parse his every syllable. "If the White Walkers are as real as Jon says, then we'll need more than just the northern houses. Winterfell has to be the first line of defense, yes, but eventually all of Westeros must stand against the threat. Once upon a time, the Seven Kingdoms united under Aegon Targaryen. Perhaps we need a new coalition, if not a single king, at least a single cause." Tyrion felt a slight chill that was not just from the corridor's drafts. He thought of Daenerys Targaryen, rumored to be gathering power across the sea, forging her own destiny with dragons. If she landed in Westeros at the same time the White Walkers came south, it would be chaos upon chaos. Yet maybe, just maybe, her dragons would be the realm's salvation. He had often speculated that if Daenerys had the sense to ally with the North, the undead might stand no chance. But that was only if alliances could be brokered before swords were drawn in fear or ambition. He nodded slowly. You speak wisdom, Lady Sansa. Uniting the realm has never been more necessary, but also never more difficult. Still, if you wish it, I can try to send discreet letters through certain channels I know. An old friend or two who remains in King's Landing who might pass messages to the right ears. We'd need to be careful. If Cersei learns of your negotiations, she'll label it treason. Sansa's lips curved into a wry smile. I doubt she needs a letter to call me a traitor, Tyrion. But yes, secrecy is wise. If you trust these channels, then do it. We have no time to waste. Jon's warnings grow more urgent with every raven. He agreed, and they parted ways. That night, Tyrion sat at a small table in his modest chamber, quill in hand, writing by the flickering light of a single candle. He penned letters to a couple of individuals he believed could be discreet, men and women who disliked Cersei's tyranny and might be open to quiet dialogue with the North. One letter, written in careful code, was addressed to Bronn, though Tyrion could not be sure the sellsword had remained in King's Landing. Another he attempted for Varys, though the spider's whereabouts remained uncertain. Tyrion crafted a third letter to an old contact in the Stormlands, a lesser branch of House Buckler that had once entertained rebellious thoughts under Stannis. There were no guarantees of success, but if even one letter reached a sympathetic ear, it might yield a future advantage for the North should war with the Iron Throne loom. He sealed them with plain wax, no sigil, and delivered them to a trusted messenger in the castle. Manderly had insisted on screening all ravens sent south, so Tyrion turned the letters over to him, explaining his purpose. Lord Manderly took the parchments with a grave nod. I'll see they're dispatched by the most discreet of means. We can't have any crow reading these and deciding to take them straight to your sister. The next day dawned with a pale sun behind ashen clouds, and the labors of reconstruction continued. Tyrion helped where he could, using his dwarfish hands to carry small crates of nails or direct stable repairs. He was no builder, but it felt satisfying to do mundane tasks that contributed to a common cause. The North might never embrace him as one of their own, but small moments like these nurtured a fragile sense of belonging. Meanwhile, Sansa presided over the welcome of new arrivals. Families who had fled their homesteads under Bolton terror began trickling in, seeking refuge within Winterfell's walls. The Mormonts, stout as ever, had sent an envoy to see that Lady Sansa's rule would protect their island from raiders. House Flint, House Locke, even some from the hills near the stony shore, bit by bit, old ties to the Starks were rekindling. These were not lavish processions. More often, they were a ragged band of peasants with a few armed men or a battered cart bearing meager possessions. Yet Sansa greeted them with empathy, listening to stories of lost kin, of hardships endured. Tyrion saw that empathy resonate among the Northmen. She was forging bonds on a personal level, one conversation at a time. One crisp afternoon, as Tyrion stood in the courtyard speaking with a blacksmith about forging arrowheads, a small party of riders arrived through the gate. They were cloaked in black, their horses weary from travel. The sigils were unfamiliar until Tyrion spotted one man's cloak pinned with the gold and black badge of the Night's Watch. He felt a jolt of interest. Had they come with more news from Jon Snow? The riders dismounted, stiff from the cold. One stepped forward, a rangy man with a lined face and the bearing of someone who had seen too much. I seek Lady Sansa Stark, he announced, voice carrying over the courtyard. I carry a message from Castle Black. Soldiers guided them inside, and Tyrion followed at a discreet distance. They were led to the great hall where Manderly and Sansa were already seated around a table littered with maps and half-eaten trenchers of bread. Sansa rose at once, her expression eager but tinged with apprehension. The messenger bowed. My lady, I am Dolorous Ed Tallet, sent by Lord Commander Snow to deliver his words and tidings. Sansa's eyes widened a fraction. Dolorous Ed, I recall you from our journey north once, long ago. How's my brother? Has the wall held? Ed's expression was grave. We live, my lady, but we face dire times. The wildlings have joined us, Tormund Giantsbane and his people, because they have seen the dead. The rumors are true. The White Walkers have grown bolder, their whites gathering in numbers beyond counting. The Night's Watch alone cannot hold them back. Jon Snow begs aid from all the North, from any who understand the stakes. He urges you to unify Winterfell's forces and send men, dragonglass, anything that can fight the dead. Silence weighed heavily in the hall. Sansa's knuckles whitened where she gripped the back of a chair. He wrote this. Aye, my lady. He also says that the time for old vows may be past. If the realm falls to the dead, no vow will matter. He asks if the North stands ready. Lord Manderly let out a slow breath. We have only just reclaimed Winterfell. Our men are weary, but we'd be fools to ignore this. Tyrion cleared his throat gently. Dragonglass is key. We have some in Winterfell stores, do we not? And we could set men to mining for more at locations rumored to have volcanic glass deposits. The Starks once had knowledge of that, I believe. Sansa's voice trembled with urgency. We can't wait for mines. We should gather what we have first and send it to the wall. If Jon needs help now, every day we delay could cost lives. Ed nodded. Lord Commander Snow is doing what he can, fortifying the wall, training new recruits. But the threat grows each time the dead walk. Even now, beyond the wall, villages have been overrun. The free folk that survived have retreated south of the wall for safety. Manderly's gaze flicked to Sansa. We'll do what we can, and if the wall cannot hold, we must prepare Winterfell as the next bulwark. The North must stand together. Sansa exhaled, looking to Dolorous Ed. You and your men will rest here, of course. We'll send you back with provisions and what dragonglass we can spare. If my brother truly believes the vows of the Night's Watch can bend, then we may also call upon him to come south and help lead our forces. The lords here need a Stark commander they can rally behind. Ed's eyes flicked to Tyrion, then back to Sansa. If Jon Snow is needed, he may come, but it won't be an easy choice. He gave his life to the Night's Watch. Yet he's changed, my lady. Ever since... He paused, as though uncertain how to phrase something. There was a mutiny. Jon was, well, you'll hear it from him, not from me. But trust that he's more determined than ever to save the realm. He can't do it alone. Tyrion felt a prickle of curiosity at Ed's half-finished sentence. He'd heard bizarre rumors, wild stories that Jon Snow had been murdered by his own men, then brought back to life. But that was likely madness, or so Tyrion would have thought before half the other unbelievable truths had been revealed. He said nothing, letting the exchange unfold. After Ed and his party were escorted to quarters, Sansa and Manderly conferred about the next move. They would write to the other northern lords to warn them the real war was yet to come. Sansa suggested dispatching huntsmen and scouts northward to gather more intelligence, though the winter storms could hamper travel. Manderly wanted to remain focused on immediate defenses at Winterfell, building watchtowers, shoring up the walls, and stockpiling as much food as possible. In the midst of that discussion, Sansa turned to Tyrion again. If the White Walkers are unstoppable by normal steel, how can we get more dragonglass, or perhaps Valyrian steel? He wished he had a ready answer. Valyrian steel is rare, my lady. Most of it is in the hands of great lords. Heartsbane belongs to House Tarly, Lady Forlorn to the Royces of the Vale, Longclaw your brother carries, and so on. As for dragonglass, Dragonstone is said to be rife with it, but that's squarely in the domain of the Baratheons or whoever currently holds that seat. Last I heard, Stannis' forces had scattered. That island might be nearly abandoned, but we'd need a fleet to mine it safely. Manderly grunted. Winter storms make a sea voyage perilous now, and we can't spare many men to risk such a trip. Tyrion shrugged, lips pursed in thought. Then perhaps we do what we can with what we have. We gather every scrap, every arrowhead made of obsidian. If your blacksmiths can affix the glass to spears and bolts, we'll have some measure of defense. But in truth, if the threat is as massive as Jon Snow believes, we might need an army beyond the north. Even if the entire north stands, that may not suffice. Sansa's gaze slid over the battered hall, the newly repaired rafters, the men and women huddling near the hearth. We will do our part here, she said softly, and I'll call upon Jon if he's willing to lead. The North will remember who stood by it when winter fell. In the days that followed, Tyrion observed an odd mixture of fervent activity and quiet dread throughout Winterfell. Smiths experimented with obsidian arrowheads, forging them with iron tips for stability. Scouts ventured north to gauge the situation near the wall. More houses trickled in pledges of men, albeit fewer than might have been hoped. Everyone had lost so much in the war. Meanwhile, the labyrinth of ravens soared out again, bearing messages to remote corners of the realm. Sansa's leadership took on greater shape. She presided over daily gatherings in the Great Hall, her presence calm and commanding. Lords who once might have dismissed a young woman as powerless now seemed to hang on her words. Where knowledge of warfare failed her, she listened to the counsel of veteran commanders. Where cunning was needed, she turned to Tyrion or Lord Manderly. She absorbed every detail, forging it into strategy. That metamorphosis from frightened girl in King's Landing to poised Lady of Winterfell made Tyrion think she had found something of her mother's spirit, of Catelyn Stark's unshakable devotion to family and duty. Tyrion himself spent many hours conferring with the castle steward and the quartermasters, studying tallies of provisions. He had to admit it felt eerily similar to the months he'd spent as master of coin, trying to stretch resources to protect a population under siege. But unlike King's Landing, there was no labyrinth of back-alley markets, no surfeit of wine-laden ships waiting at the docks. Here, the North survived on what it hunted, farmed, or traded in meager caravans. Winterfell's safety net was thinner than he cared to contemplate. He urged them to store as much salted meat as possible, to begin hunting while game was still to be found, to keep the winter town that stretched around the castle from falling into disrepair. If the White Walkers marched south, thousands of peasants might flock behind Winterfell's walls, and they would need every last crumb of bread. That sense of the oncoming storm pressed on everyone's mind. In the next council, they decided to hold a gathering of all northern lords and representatives to formally acknowledge Sansa Stark or Jon Snow as the rightful Stark leader. It was time for clarity. Sansa drafted letters calling each house to send a voice. If Jon himself arrived, they would see how the North responded to his presence. If not, Sansa would accept that mantle. Not a fortnight later, horns blew from the ramparts. Tyrion hurried to the courtyard, heart pounding, uncertain of whether it was friend or foe approaching. He found Sansa already there, flanked by manderly and a retinue of soldiers. Snow whirled in gusts over the stones, and the cold wind bit at Tyrion's cheeks. A column of riders drew near, cloaked in black and gray. At their head, Tyrion saw a tall figure with a drawn face and dark hair. Jon Snow had arrived. He wore the attire of the Night's Watch, though without the usual stoic escort of black brothers. Behind him rode a wildling with a ginger beard, several other men in furs, and a handful of watchmen. As they passed through the gates, Tyrion saw the lines of weariness etched into Jon's face. Yet his eyes burned with quiet intensity. Jon dismounted and stepped forward. The courtyard felt impossibly still. For a moment, brother and sister regarded each other across the pact. Snow. Tyrion could see a flicker of emotion in Sansa's eyes. Relief, perhaps, or the ache of all they had lost. Then they embraced, a simple gesture that cut through the hush. Jon, Sansa said, voice trembling. I wasn't sure you would come. He held her gently. We have no time to stay apart, Sansa. The wall, the dead are coming. And I needed to see our home once more, to see how it stands. It's not what I remember, but it's still Winterfell. His voice had changed since Tyrion last spoke with him, that day on the road to the wall so many years ago. There was a heavier weight in it, a sense of sorrow and determination fused together. Tyrion stepped forward, offering a respectful dip of his head. Lord Snow, or rather Lord Commander, it's good to see you again. Jon's dark eyes flicked to Tyrion, mild surprise evident, but he managed a nod. You too, Tyrion. I heard you were here. I didn't believe it at first. I doubt many do, Tyrion said with a small, wry smile. But yes, I stand with the North now. Jon gave him a searching look, then turned his attention back to Sansa. We came by way of the last hearth. The Umbers are broken, torn apart by old betrayals with the Boltons. Some joined them, some resisted. Now they're just scattered. The winter snows slow us. The dead press on from beyond the wall. It's only a matter of time before a breach. We need to prepare. They ushered Jon and his companions inside, to the warmth of the hall. There, over hot broth and bread, Jon recounted what he had witnessed. Hardhome's devastation, the moment he saw the Night King raise an army of corpses with nothing more than a gesture. The free folk who followed him, bound by the shared knowledge that the dead spared no one. Tormund Giantsbane, seated nearby, confirmed every dire word, spitting curses at the memory of whites pouring through the narrow passes north of the wall. Sansa's face paled, though she listened with unblinking resolve. Manderly muttered low, half in disbelief, half in horror. Tyrion noticed a hush had fallen among the other lords who'd gathered to greet Jon. None dared to question him outright, for the conviction in his voice was unmistakable. At the end of it, Jon exhaled, shoulders sagging. The wall stands for now, but the Night's Watch is less than 1,000 men. Even with the wildlings alongside us, we can't guard every mile. If the White Walkers find a way around or simply break through, they'll march on the north. Could happen in a matter of weeks, months at best. Winter is here, and they thrive in the cold. Sansa reached over and gripped Jon's hand. You're home now, Jon. Even if you must return to the wall, at least let us see to it that the North unites behind a single banner. The lords are coming to Winterfell for a gathering. They need a leader to stand against this threat. Jon hesitated, brow furrowing. I'm a brother of the Watch, Sansa. My vows. Tormund scoffed. Your vows ended when those crows put daggers in your chest, Jon Snow. You died for them, remember? Let the realm see you as you are now. A man returned from death, or so they say. The words sent a ripple of shock through the hall. Manderly's eyes went wide. Tyrion felt his stomach twist. Had Tormund just confirmed that Jon had truly died and risen? The hush deepened. Sansa blinked. What did he say? Jon's face tightened. I was killed by mutineers in the Watch. I somehow returned. It's a long story, Sansa, and I'll tell you what I can. But Tormund is right. My vows bound me until death. I died. Now my duty is to the living to stop the White Walkers if I can. If that means I must stand as a Stark, then... He trailed off, meeting her gaze. You are the rightful lady of Winterfell. If you want me here, I'll fight for our home, for all of the North. Tyrion watched as Sansa blinked away tears. I do want that. I can't lead a war on my own. I've done my best to restore Winterfell, but you have the experience with battles, with commanding men, forging alliances. We were children when we parted. Now we must save our people. Together. Jon nodded, and a faint, weary smile touched his lips. All right, sister, but let's make one thing clear. I have no love for the Iron Throne, no desire to bend the knee to a queen who cares nothing for the North. I serve the realm's survival. If that puts us in conflict with the Lannisters, so be it. Manderly slapped a hand on the table with approval. Well said. The North stands alone if need be, but we'd be fools not to try for southern allies who share our plight. Either way, we follow the Starks. Jon's gaze lingered on Tyrion for a moment. Tyrion cleared his throat. You have nothing to fear from me, Lord Commander. I've no love for my sister's reign. That is one reason I stand here in Winterfell. We can coordinate so that if King's Landing tries to intervene, they'll find it quite difficult to muster an army, especially in these snows. Jon breathed out. I believe you, Tyrion. I'm not sure why, but I do. Soon after, the castle erupted with plans for a great council of northern lords, and any who might come from outside the region. Jon wrote letters detailing the threat, urging them to unite and set aside old grudges. Sansa joined him in writing a more personal plea to houses that had once sworn to Ned Stark but grown distant after the Red Wedding. Meanwhile, Tormund and a few wildlings roamed the courtyard with a mixture of curiosity and impatience, occasionally clashing with castle guards over something trivial. Tyrion suspected that forging a bond between the free folk and the traditional northern houses would be no easy task, but that was for Jon and Sansa to navigate. Tyrion tried not to dwell on the notion that Jon Snow had actually returned from death. He told himself it was a rumor inflated by wildlings, that perhaps Jon had been close to death, then revived by a maester's skill. Yet Tormund's blunt words and Jon's own guarded silence implied something more uncanny. In a world of dragons and White Walkers, perhaps it shouldn't have been so unimaginable. Either way, Tyrion found it unsettling and deeply intriguing. Within a week, the first of the invited houses arrived, braving the snow-choked roads to attend the gathering. Others sent ravens with apologies or cautious rejections. A few remained silent. The great hall once more filled with the clamor of many voices, men and women who had once fought each other, forced to share a table for the sake of survival. Tension crackled like static in the air. Sansa, with Jon at her side, welcomed them. Robert Glover, Lady Mormont, and other lesser lords stood nearby. Tyrion observed from a respectful distance, conscious that his presence might stir old resentments. Still, he stood ready if Sansa or Jon needed his political acumen. At the far end of the hall, a pair of giant braziers blazed, radiating warmth that fought against the chill sneaking in from the outer corridors. When everyone had assembled, a ragged crowd of fur-cloaked figures smelling of horse and travel, Sansa and Jon conferred briefly, then Sansa took a step forward. Conversation lulled, and all eyes turned to her. She drew a breath, her voice carrying through the hall with surprising strength. "Lords and ladies of the North, we thank you for coming. Winter is upon us, and the greatest threat in our history gathers beyond the wall. Jon Snow has seen the dead with his own eyes. The wall cannot hold forever. If we fail to unite, the White Walkers will sweep across our lands, destroying everything we hold dear." Muttered voices rose, some more incredulous than others. One older man called out, "We've heard these tales before, from days of the long night. Why should we believe we face it now?" Jon's expression hardened. "Because I've fought them. I've seen them raise our fallen as whites. No matter how many times we cut them down, they rose again. They do not tire or fear. Only Dragonglass and Valyrian steel can harm them. I stand here before you as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but I come as a Stark in blood, son of Ned Stark, to beg you to heed this threat. This is not a war we can run from or negotiate away. The dead do not care about our names or titles." Lady Mormont, a fierce girl of perhaps a dozen years, rose from her seat. Her clear voice rang out, "House Mormont knows no fear of the dead. We lost men fighting the Boltons, but that was just the start. I stand by House Stark. Bear Island stands by the North." Her blunt confidence impressed even the skeptics. Robert Glover spoke next, glancing around. "I've seen the bodies come down from the wall, men who looked half-frozen with fear. They spoke of corpses walking. I won't pretend it doesn't sound mad, but these are mad times. We either stand or we fall." There was more argument, some lords voicing doubts about marching men north when the roads were nearly impassable, others concerned about feeding an army through the winter. Jon countered that only by confronting the threat could they ensure future harvests and survival. Sansa gently reminded them that as Lady of Winterfell, she would do all in her power to safeguard their families both in the castle and beyond. Manderly rumbled support, brandishing the Merman sigil and pledging White Harbor's ships if needed, though the winter seas would be treacherous. At last, as the debate reached a crescendo, an older lord wearing a battered helm stepped forward. "I remember your father, Ned Stark," he said, looking at Jon. "He stood for honor, for truth. If you say the dead are coming, I'll trust you, boy. I'll stand with you, though it might mean the end of us all." One by one, the gathered lords raised their voices in assent, some more enthusiastically, others still hesitant. But the tide turned toward unity. They accepted that either they would face extinction alone or stand together under a Stark banner. A hush spread, as if everyone realized they had reached a moment of decision. Sansa looked to Jon, and Jon inclined his head at her. Then, softly but with firm authority, Sansa raised her voice again. "Thank you. We cannot do this without you. My brother and I will share the burden, but Jon has the experience in battle and with the threat beyond the wall. We ask you to acknowledge him as the Stark in Winterfell to lead our forces against the dead. If you will not have a bastard, then we will name him our true-born brother. Let all know that Ned Stark's blood runs in his veins, and he stands as Warden of the North." Jon blinked in surprise. This had not been discussed in quite such direct terms. A stirring moved through the assembly. Lady Mormont eyed Jon Snow with open approval. Robert Glover and Manderly exchanged glances. Then Manderly turned to the crowd. "I, Wyman Manderly, proclaim Jon Snow the Lord of Winterfell, if he will bear that title for the sake of the North. Ned Stark's heir in spirit, if not by birth, to stand guard in this darkest hour." Jon's face flushed. "I can't," he began, but the tumult of voices drowned him out, a growing roar of acclamation. Sansa touched his arm, her expression gentle yet resolute. She whispered so that only he could hear, "You must, Jon. For the North. For us all." Slowly, Jon Snow turned to face them, a weight in his eyes. Tyrion saw the swirl of emotions on his face, humility, uncertainty, duty. Then he squared his shoulders. "If this is what the North requires, I accept. But know that I claim this not for power or ambition, only to unite us against the true enemy." Cheers erupted, echoing off the rafters. The king in the north, several voices cried, echoing the old rallying call. Others took it up until the entire hall reverberated. Sansa stepped back, letting them hail Jon. The memory of Robb Stark, crowned king in the north in these very walls, hung in the air. That king had met a tragic end. Perhaps they all remembered it. Yet the north was a place of stubborn resilience, and when faced with annihilation, they did not shirk. The cheers seemed to hold not just hope, but a fierce defiance of fate. Jon lifted a hand to quiet them. "I'm no king," he said, voice cutting through the chorus. "I am your servant, as I was the realm's servant on the wall. Let us stand together. We have little time and much to do." The White Walkers will not delay. But the chant continued, unstoppable. "King in the north, king in the north." Tyrion felt a pang of sorrow, recalling how Robb Stark had once been hailed so. Yet he also felt a spark of hope that perhaps, this time, the North's chosen leader would not be undone by betrayal or ill fortune. If the gods were just, Jon Snow would lead them against the undead horde, an unlikely hero who had already tasted death. That night, Winterfell brimmed with a tempered sort of celebration. Not a festive spree, these were dark times, but a gathering of men and women who saw in Jon Snow a chance to rally. Fires burned in the hearths, the smell of stew and hot cider wafting from the kitchens. Warriors swapped stories, forging or renewing alliances. Tyrion circulated among them, hearing plans for defending key passes, for distributing what scant dragonglass they had. Whispers floated about how the veil might be drawn in if Petyr Baelish were persuaded to bring the Knights of the Eyrie. Some suggested that after the White Walkers were defeated, if they ever were, the North should remain independent. But that was a debate for another day. Sansa found Tyrion near the dais, taking a moment's rest in a wooden chair. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for standing with us. If you hadn't helped unify the lords and provided counsel, we might still be scattered. And Jon might still be brooding on the wall." Tyrion shrugged lightly, though her words brought a warm spark of pride. "I did what I could. You and Jon have done the real work, persuading your people that this threat is real." She leaned closer, voice low. "You've been sending letters south, yes? Is there any response at all?" He shook his head. "Not yet. It might take time, or they might have been intercepted. My sister has many spies. Varys, if he's still in King's Landing, is cunning enough to hide from them, but I can't be sure he remains there. We can only wait and see. We might also consider other routes. The Vale is close, and we know Petyr Baelish's cunning can be formidable." Sansa's mouth tightened at the mention of Baelish. "He once helped me escape King's Landing. But I also know he was part of the conspiracy that led to my father's downfall. I'll never fully trust him. Still, the Knights of the Vale could be critical in this fight. I've heard Baelish might be in the Eyrie, shaping young Lord Robert to do his bidding. Whether he'll commit forces to us remains uncertain." Tyrion sighed. "If the fight against the dead does not stir him to action, perhaps an appeal to ambition might. He might see an advantage in aiding the winning side. But that's your call, my lady. You know him better than I do." She exhaled. "I'll consider it. For now, we must focus on what we have." The lords agreed to send a portion of their men north to reinforce the wall. Some must remain behind to protect their lands. Winterfell will become a rallying point if the wall falls. They parted ways. Tyrion joined a small circle of men discussing supply lines, pondering how to convey men safely to Castle Black. The route was perilous, with drifting snows making each league a challenge. One lord suggested using sleds and dogs to expedite travel. Another insisted that men who marched in the open cold would arrive too exhausted to fight. Eventually they agreed to gather wagons, horses, and supplies at Last Hearth and attempt a slow but steady process of sending contingents to the wall in waves. Tyrion's role was to help plan the logistics, who traveled when, and how they'd be fed en route. All the while, at the back of his mind, Tyrion wondered how long it would be until Cersei, or Daenerys Targaryen, learned of these events. The North had crowned a new Stark king, defying the Iron Throne in all but name. If either queen decided to stake a claim here, they might come with armies. But winter favored the defenders, and the North could hold out. For how long, though, against dragons or fresh southern forces? That question gnawed at him as he assisted with tallies and routes. Days turned into weeks. Snow deepened in the courtyards, piling high against the walls. Men departed in small columns, heading for the wall or traveling to muster their own forces. Ravens arrived sporadically with reports of marauders wearing the flayed man sigil, outlaws lurking near ruined villages, rumors of direwolves in the distant hills. Some claimed that Ghost, Jon's white direwolf, roamed freely, scouting for the pack. Tyrion rarely caught a glimpse of the beast, though he occasionally heard its eerie howls at night. Jon divided his time between training men in the courtyard, showing them the fundamentals of fighting the dead, and poring over old texts about the long night, hoping for secrets on how the walkers were first driven back. Bran Stark was rumored in some quarters to be alive beyond the wall, gifted with strange powers, but no one knew how to find him. Arya Stark was rumored as well, flitting through the Riverlands or heading west. Each rumor carried the promise of another Stark who might return to defend their home. Yet they remained only that, rumors. Sansa managed the daily governance of Winterfell. She oversaw the arrival of farmers and refugees, ensuring they were given shelter and a share of provisions. Her command of the household staff grew more assured every day. More than once, Tyrion saw her negotiating disputes between small folk and soldiers or between houses that clashed over property lines. She might have dreamed of a simpler life once, but now she embraced the hard tasks of leadership. At times, Tyrion remembered his forced marriage to her back in the Red Keep, a union neither had wanted, yet he found himself reflecting that if fate had been kinder, Sansa would have made a formidable partner to any man with a good heart. Perhaps it was better that she led on her own now, free from the Lannister yoke. At night, Tyrion would sometimes ascend the walls, peering at the vast northern sky. Cold stars glittered overhead. Winterfell glowed with torchlight in pockets, but beyond lay a sea of darkness. He imagined the White Walkers stirring far away in that black horizon, an army of silent wraiths treading through endless snows. If Daenerys Targaryen had dragons, would she come in time to turn those walkers to ash? And if so, what price would she demand from the north? He could only wonder. If his letters ever reached her, or any of his southern contacts, perhaps the shape of the war would change. But for now, the north stood alone. One evening, after the last flickers of daylight had vanished, Tyrion headed to the library tower, seeking some volume that might shed additional light on ancient conflicts. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, the musty scent of parchment and leather greeting him. Shelves stretched along the walls, many in disrepair or half-empty. The Boltons and Greyjoys had not been kind to Winterfell's collection. By flickering lantern, he spotted Maester Wolkan hunched over a desk, sorting through old scrolls that had survived. Wolkan looked up, blinking behind narrow spectacles. "Ah, Lord Tyrion," he greeted softly. "I was just cataloging what remains." "I'm no lord," Tyrion corrected gently. "Just Tyrion will do." "Apologies for intruding, but I wondered if you had anything about the long night or the tactics used by Brandon the Builder." Wolkan considered, then gestured to a shelf half hidden by a fallen beam. "We have some fragmi. NTS. Most are more myth than fact. But feel free to look. Mind the dust." Tyrion moved to the indicated shelf, carefully extracting a few tomes. One was titled Lives of the High Lords of Winterfell, penned centuries ago. Another was barely readable, its cover scorched and half-eaten by damp. He found a small bench to sit on and began leafing through them, searching for anything beyond legends about the children of the forest, the Night King of old, or the building of the wall. He found references to dragonglass weapons, to an alliance between men and the children, but little in the way of concrete battlefield strategies. Mostly, the stories served to reinforce how unstoppable the walkers had seemed until some cosmic shift or new magic turned the tide. He let out a quiet sigh, closing one volume. How could they replicate miracles from ages past? The children of the forest were all but gone. The realm had shattered into warring factions. But the North had something they'd not possessed in the old tales. Knowledge that the threat was real. And knowledge, in Tyrion's view, could be the greatest weapon of all. Perhaps they could contrive a new miracle if they must. He heard the door open again and glanced up. Jon Snow stepped in, wearing a heavy black cloak. His hair was damp from the snow outside, and he looked as though he'd not slept well. Tyrion stood, inclining his head. "Jon." "Tyrion," Jon acknowledged, scanning the cluttered space. "I came to see if the Maester had found anything that might help. I suppose I'm not the only one with that idea." Tyrion gave a half-smile. "No, the old tales are thin on details for how to kill an army of the dead. But we do what we can." He paused, noting the tension lining Jon's brow. "Is something on your mind?" Jon hesitated, then moved to stand beside Tyrion near the desk. He lowered his voice. I keep thinking about how Robb was crowned king in the north. How he swore to protect his people only to die at the Twins. I don't want to repeat his mistakes. I don't want the men who follow me to march into another red wedding. I have no illusions. This war is likely worse than any battle for the throne. We're facing the end of all things. If the White Walkers break our lines. Tyrion's tone softened. You have one advantage Robb did not. Clarity. Robb was mired in a war of vengeance and politics. You know exactly who the enemy is and what must be done to stop them. Besides, you're not alone. The entire North stands behind you, as do the wildlings. And you have Sansa. She's no frightened girl anymore. She sees the bigger picture. Jon exhaled. Yes, but so many uncertainties remain. We have too little obsidian, too few Valyrian blades. We can't rely on the Iron Throne for help. If Daenerys Targaryen lands, will she see us as allies or try to make the North bend the knee? Will the realm tear itself apart again before the dead even arrive? Tyrion nodded grimly. You've posed all the questions that keep me awake at night, Jon, but we cannot let ourselves be paralyzed by them. The best we can do is prepare our defenses, rally who we can, and hope that if Daenerys does come, she realizes the real war is here. If the White Walkers sweep the north, there won't be much of a kingdom left to claim. Jon studied Tyrion in the lantern's glow. You've changed since King's Landing. I remember a clever man who drank a lot of wine and spoke in riddles. Now you still speak in riddles, but they're driven by something else. A sense of purpose. Tyrion felt the weight of that observation. Losing everything can do that to a man, Jon. I left King's Landing with blood on my hands, the blood of my father who hated me and my lover who betrayed me. I realized I had no place in that nest of vipers. Perhaps I'm trying to atone, or at least to ensure the realm stands a chance. Call it what you will. Jon clasped Tyrion's shoulder, a gesture of unexpected camaraderie. We need all the help we can get. If atonement is your motivation, so be it. Just know that the North has long memories. Some might never forgive a Lannister. But if we win this war, they may at least respect you. Tyrion's mouth twisted into a half-smile. Respect is better than love. Love is fleeting, often built on illusions. Respect is at least grounded in what you do. Jon chuckled dryly. You sound like my father might have sounded if he'd lived in King's Landing. They shared a quiet moment, united by the pressing weight of the burdens on them both. Jon then gathered a few scrolls the maester had laid out, nodded a brief farewell, and left. Tyrion lingered with the dusty tomes, reflecting on how improbable this alliance was. A Stark bastard, once a brother of the Watch, newly hailed as king in the north, and a Lannister dwarf scorned by his own blood. Yet the tapestry of events that had led them here felt strangely ordained, as if shaped by forces beyond their comprehension. When he finally returned to his chamber, Tyrion found it difficult to sleep. The wind keened outside the shuttered windows. He stoked the small hearth fire and mulled over possibilities. Was there truly no way to coax the Vale into supporting them directly? Peter Baelish might bring the Ares Knights, but at what cost? And what of the Riverlands, still battered by war? The Freys were in disarray, rumored to be infighting after Walder Frey's diminishing hold on his brood. If some of the Tully remnants could be rallied, that might provide more men. But every plan hinged on time. Time to gather allies, time to prepare. Time that the White Walkers might not grant them. At dawn, Tyrion rose and penned letters to be sent by Raven. One to the maester at Riverrun, politely inquiring after the Tullis state, hinting at the dire threat from the north. Another letter to the Eyrie addressing young Lord Robert Arryn, though in truth it would be read by Baelish. He couched it in terms of mutual interest, reminding the Vale that if the north fell, the Vale would be next. He sealed them carefully and delivered them to the rookery, hoping some measure of courtesy and fear might sway them. Then he went to break his fast with Sansa and Jon, quietly informing them of his attempt. Jon gave him a nod of thanks, though Sansa said little. She seemed pensive, as though thinking of her own past dealings with Baelish. In the subsequent days, more men departed for the Wall, led by a few knights and lords determined to see the threat for themselves. Sansa oversaw the forging of more obsidian arrowheads. Jon roamed between the courtyard and the library, conferring with Tormund and the Black brothers who had accompanied him. Rumors surfaced that Ramsay Bolton had been spotted near the rills, gathering a ragged band of cutthroats to ambush travelers. Each time the rumor arose, the outriders would ride out, returning empty-handed. Ramsay, if he truly lived, proved elusive. But a few battered corpses discovered in the snow, bearing marks of sadistic torture, spoke to his presence. Fear simmered, an undercurrent beneath the heavier dread of the undead. Tyrion found it grimly ironic that while the White Walkers threatened all life in Westeros, the living still found ways to kill and terrorize each other. Eventually, a fresh wave of letters reached Winterfell. Some were from minor lords pledging further men. Others brought dire tidings, villages vanishing in the night, watchers on the wall spotting huge shapes in the distance. The Frey seemed to be ignoring pleas from the north altogether. The Eyrie had yet to respond. The Stormlands were apparently embroiled in their own local feuds. And from King's Landing, nothing. No missives, no ravens of condemnation or challenge. It was as though Cersei remained indifferent or had not yet learned that the North had crowned a new Stark king. Late one evening, as the fires in Winterfell's hearths burned low, Tyrion found himself summoned to Jon's Solar, a cramped room near the great keep that Ned Stark once used for private councils. He arrived to find Jon and Sansa seated at a small table along with Wyman Manderly and Lady Mormont. A single lamp illuminated their faces in flickering light. Jon motioned for Tyrion to sit. "We've had more reports from the north. My men are sending ravens from Castle Black. The first truly large group of whites has been spotted, staggering along the eastern coastline of the haunted forest. Perhaps thousands. The walkers themselves were seen at a distance, though it's impossible to say how many. The wall still holds them back, but we don't know for how long." Sansa's posture was rigid as though braced for a blow. "What can we do?" Jon tapped a parchment. "I'm taking a company north to the wall to see for myself and coordinate the defense. We'll bring more dragonglass weapons. Tormund will lead the wildlings who remain in the gift. I won't take the entire host. Winterfell must still be protected. Sansa, I'd leave you here to continue preparing defenses should the worst happen." She bit her lip. "If you think that's wise. You said it yourself, the final stand might happen at the wall, or it might happen here." Manderly chimed in. "Winterfell is the seat of the king in the north now. Should the unspeakable occur, you're our fallback. We'll hold as long as we can. But if the wall should fail, we must have a strong presence to face them on our own ground." Lady Mormont nodded, arms crossed. "Bear Island will send men north as well. But we can't leave Winterfell vulnerable." Jon looked to Tyrion. "And you? Will you remain or come north with me?" Tyrion considered. "I can coordinate supply runs if I remain here, see that the lines of communication stay intact. I'm no warrior. You won't need my sword. But if you think my presence at the wall could help persuade any skeptics who remain." Jon waved that off gently. "No, you're more useful here. If letters arrive from the south, you'll know how to handle them. I trust you to speak for the north in my absence alongside Sansa. The truth is, if I fall at the wall, you two must lead together." A hush fell. It was the first time Tyrion had heard Jon plainly state the possibility of his own death. But it was practical. The war ahead offered no promises. Tyrion inclined his head. "Very well. I'll do my utmost to help Lady Sansa hold Winterfell. May the gods old or new grant you victory up north." Soon after, the meeting dispersed. Preparations for Jon's departure began at once, a flurry of packing and forging. Within a day, a large column of men was ready, Night's Watch brothers, wildlings, and northern volunteers who had seen enough to believe in the undead threat. They traveled light, hoping to avoid getting stuck in deep snowdrifts. Sansa watched from the walls as Jon led them out, his black cloak merging into the gloom. Ghost padded by his side, silent as a shadow. Tyrion stood behind her, saying nothing. He saw the tension in her posture, the press of her hands on the cold stone. She had already lost so many family members. Sending Jon off to face the dead could not be easy. But she remained poised, her expression set in determination. When they were gone, Winterfell seemed emptier. The nights lengthened. The wind howled more fiercely. Yet the tasks did not cease. Tyrion oversaw the distribution of rations, the forging of more arrowheads, the repair of collapsed portions of the outer wall. Sansa kept meeting with lords, insisted on daily weapons drills, and personally walked the ramparts each afternoon to speak with the guards. The gathered civilians in the winter town were carefully monitored to prevent starvation or illness. Everyone sensed the momentous weight of the waiting game. Would the walkers breach the wall and sweep south, or would the Black Brothers and the wildlings hold them back long enough for some miracle? One particularly frigid evening, a scout stumbled in from the wilderness, half-frozen, babbling about flayed men attacking a small camp of travelers on the King's Road. Sansa dispatched a party to investigate. They returned with grim news, more bodies, tortured in that sadistic style rumored to be Ramsay's trademark. Tyrion found Sansa in the Solar afterward, pacing with fury. "That monster. He's alive. We have to put an end to him." Tyrion sighed. "Ramsay's no fool when it comes to evading capture. He likely has safe houses or hidden dens. We can send out more patrols, but the snows are thick and he knows these lands well. She pressed a hand to her forehead. If we don't root him out, he'll sow chaos while Jon fights the real war. We can't let him linger like a poison in the north. They organized a coordinated sweep, House Serwyn and House Glover leading joint forces. Tyrion contributed a few strategic suggestions: station watchers on key crossroad points, watch for telltale signs of Bolton infiltration, coordinate signals. Over the next fortnight, multiple groups scoured likely hideouts. A few of Ramsay's men were cornered and killed, but the bastard himself remained elusive. Sporadic atrocities continued, fueling anger among the Northmen. Tyrion felt a creeping dread that even with the White Walkers on the march, the living still inflicted horrors on each other. During these tense days, no word came from Jon or the Wall. Then, one late afternoon, a small party of riders from Castle Black arrived. Tyrion and Sansa hurried to greet them. At their head was Daenerys again, exhausted and grimy from the road. He bowed stiffly. Lord Commander Snow remains at the Wall, Ed reported. He has battled several probing attacks by Whites near Eastwatch. They're testing our defenses. The good news is they haven't found a way through yet. But we need more men. We need more dragonglass. If the main host marches, we'll be overwhelmed. Sansa drew a shaky breath. We'll send what we can. How long do you think you have? Ed's gaze flicked to Tyrion. Days, weeks, no one knows. The White Walkers move at their own pace, raising the dead as they go. Every night the temperature drops and the darkness lasts a bit longer. Lord Commander says we must keep faith that we can hold, but he won't pretend to be confident. We're outnumbered 100 to 1. Tyrion felt his heart sink. We'll gather another detachment. Maybe we can muster more men from the local houses who remain cautious. And we can attempt to expedite the forging of obsidian weapons. Ed nodded wearily. Do it quickly. There's no time to lose. If you have ravens to spare, send them to any house that might yet come. Jon says we need every able body. Sansa's voice was steady. Thank you, Ed. You'll rest here before returning. A day, maybe two, Ed allowed, though he looked as if he'd rather turn around immediately. Lord Commander would want me back soon. That evening, Sansa convened another urgent council. The mood was grim. Everyone understood that if the dead truly launched a massive assault, it was uncertain whether the Wall could hold. House Serwyn and House Locke offered to send some of their men north. Lady Mormont decided to travel in person with more of the Bear Island warriors, insisting she'd fight at Jon's side. Tyrion marveled at her ferocity, a girl so young leading men to the war's front line. While they planned, a watchman burst into the hall, panting, cheeks reddened by the cold. Riders from the West Gate, he gasped. They have the Flayed Man banner, but they're surrendering. They say they bring a gift for Lady Stark. Alarm ripped through the gathered lords. Sansa exchanged a horrified look with Tyrion. Manderly barked an order for additional guards to the courtyard. In moments, they all hurried out, bracing themselves for a trick or ambush. The courtyard torches revealed a small group of ragged men, indeed bearing a battered banner with the Flayed Man. They looked half-starved, faces streaked with dirt. One man dismounted and knelt in the snow, holding up empty hands. Mercy, Lady Stark, he said hoarsely. We deserted the bastard. We couldn't take no more of his sick games. He's out there, but we slipped away. Brought you something. A peace offering. He gestured behind him, and two of his fellows dragged a limp figure forward, bound at the ankles and wrists, a hood over the head. Everyone tensed, swords half-drawn. Tyrion's pulse hammered. Was it some trick, a Trojan horse? Sansa signaled the guards to approach warily. The deserters yanked the hood off the captive. Torchlight fell on a bruised face, battered near to unrecognizable, but the pale eyes and ruined lips were a chilling sight. Ramsay Bolton. A faint hush stole over the courtyard. Ramsay's face was swollen, half-caked with blood, eyes flicking with malevolent fury even in defeat. He glared at Sansa, then hissed something incoherent through split lips. The deserter spat. He tried to kill us in our sleep for questioning his orders. We overpowered him barely. Figured we'd be dead men if we didn't do something. So here. We brought him to you. Just let us live. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Sansa stepped forward. Tyrion saw a swirl of emotions flit across her face, hatred, fear, relief. She stared at Ramsay, who snarled incoherently, struggling against his bonds. He was too injured or drugged to do more than flop in the snow. A hush clung to the gathered watchers, uncertain as though the smallest spark could set off an inferno. Sansa spoke in a voice that trembled only slightly. Take him to the deepest cell. Keep him under heavy guard. Make sure he can't harm anyone. The deserters sagged with relief. Sansa nodded at the nearest guard. These men have given us a gift indeed. Feed them, keep them under watch until we're sure of their story. Ramsay spat blood at her feet, a guttural, bestial sound. The guards hauled him upright and dragged him away, disappearing into the depths of the castle. Sansa stood there a moment, snow collecting on her cloak as though she had to convince herself it was real. Tyrion could barely tear his gaze from the spot where Ramsay had lain. So much carnage, so much terror, and now the beast was caged. In the days that followed, Winterfell seethed with the revelation. Some demanded Ramsay's immediate execution, others cried for a public trial, a punishment that fit his atrocities. Sansa forbade any to approach the cell without her explicit permission. Twice, Tyrion heard that she had gone down to the dungeons alone. No one knew precisely what transpired between them. All that was certain was that she emerged pale but resolute. At last, word came that Sansa had decided Ramsay Bolton's fate. She called the lords to the courtyard, the same place where he was first delivered. Snow fell gently that morning, muffling the world in white silence. A crowd gathered, forming a ring around a raised wooden scaffold. Tyrion, Manderly, Lady Mormont, and other notables stood at the forefront. Sansa arrived, cloaked in fur. Guards dragged Ramsay forth, still bound, face half-healed in angry bruises. There was an eerie hush, as if the entire keep held its breath. Sansa's voice carried, cold and steady. Ramsay Bolton has committed unspeakable crimes against the North and its people. He tortured innocents, betrayed my family, and broke every guest right. He murdered children, hunted women. We have the accounts of countless victims. We have his own words, his confessions. The North demands justice. Ramsay tried to speak, but a guard struck him across the mouth. Blood dribbled from his lips. He laughed, a hollow mad sound. "Stark bitch," he hissed. "You think you've won? The dead are coming for you all. Even your bastard brother will die, and I'll be waiting in the night to it." Another strike silenced him. Sansa's expression was carved. "D from ice. The dead might come, Ramsay, but you will not live to see them. The North was once your playground of horrors. That ends now." She stepped aside. Two guards seized Ramsay's arms, dragging him to a post hammered into the scaffold. Lady Mormont watched, stone-faced. Some among the crowd looked away, uneasy. Tyrion felt his stomach twist, but he understood that this day had long been coming. Ramsay struggled, cursing and shrieking obscenities. Sansa met his gaze one last time, then nodded to the headsman. The headsman, wearing a stark cloak, raised a heavy northern sword. Ramsay died beneath that blade, screaming until the steel bit home. Silence followed, broken only by the soft hiss of wind. Blood darkened the snow. Many in the crowd felt a grim satisfaction, but no cheers arose. Tyrion saw Sansa close her eyes, exhaling a long breath. Perhaps she found some measure of closure. Or perhaps she only felt the endless weight of sorrow. The war with the dead loomed over them, making any personal vengeance seem small. The body was carried away, burned outside the walls so no rumors of whites or foul resurrection could linger. The watchers dispersed, subdued. Sansa left the courtyard without a word, her face unreadable. Tyrion stood there a moment, staring at the crimson stain on the snow, recalling all the horrors that man had unleashed. At least one evil had been excised from the North. In any other time, that might have ended the story of suffering. But now a far greater evil waited in the frozen wastes. That afternoon, as the last glow of sun faded behind Winterfell's towers, Tyrion found Sansa in the godwood, standing beneath the ancient weirwood. He approached quietly, footsteps crunching. She wore a thick cloak, her breath escaping in wisps. She glanced over when she heard him. "It's done," she said softly. "Ramsay's gone." He nodded. "He can harm no one else." She turned to face the heart tree, its carved face streaked with red sap. "I did what had to be done for the North, for everyone he hurt. He was a beast, and beasts must be put down. But it doesn't feel like the triumph I once imagined." Tyrion chose his words carefully. "Vengeance rarely brings the peace we think it will. Still, a threat is removed. You saved countless lives from whatever he would have done next." She nodded, eyes distant. "Yes. Yet the real battle is still ahead. Jon's at the wall, the White Walkers gathering. We might all be dead by spring." Tyrion took a moment to gaze at the weirwood's solemn visage. "Which is why we must keep fighting, keep preparing. You've done the North a great service by removing the Boltons. You and Jon have reclaimed Winterfell. If there's a chance for the realm, it starts here." She studied him as if seeking some reassurance in his eyes. "You've changed, Tyrion. The day we wed, I thought you cruel, or at best indifferent. You've shown me otherwise." He met her gaze steadily. "I was never indifferent to your suffering. But I was too mired in my family's webs. I thought to play the game while others bled. Now I see the cost more clearly." Sansa wrapped her cloak tighter. "I hope when this is all over, if we live, we can build a land without men like Ramsay or Joffrey, without betrayals and horrors. Tyrion allowed himself a faint, sad smile. I'd like to believe that. We can betray my lady. She looked away, gaze drifting to the weirwood branches overhead, skeletal and dusted with snow. The hush of the godwood settled around them. Tyrion sensed her lingering sorrow and resolve, an alloy of steel forged by the cruelties of the world. For a brief instant, he wondered if the children of Ned Stark were all shaped by tragedy into something harder, sharper. Jon on the wall, Bran lost beyond it, Arya wandering gods knew where, Sansa here bearing Winterfell's burdens. The old gods, if they were watching, must marvel at what their mortal children had become. When Sansa turned back, her voice was quiet but firm. We will endure, Tyrion. No matter what comes from the north, no matter what storms gather, the north endures. The Starks endure. He bowed his head in solemn agreement. Yes. Let us hope that is enough to weather what's coming. In the weeks that followed, with Ramsay's threat removed, a certain unease lifted from the castle. More men volunteered to march north, and some houses that had held back out of fear of the Boltons now pledged openly to the Starks. Sansa oversaw the final wave of supplies sent to Castle Black, along with reinforcement troops led by Lady Mormont. Winterfell now stood half-empty of its fighting force, but strong in spirit. The sense of imminent battle overshadowed everything. Tyrion spent long days finalizing logistics, ensuring the lines of communication with the wall were as open as the weather allowed. He also oversaw the continuing repair of the castle's defenses. Should the worst happen, thousands might pour south, seeking refuge. He wanted Winterfell to be as strong a bastion as possible. At last, one bitter morning, a raven arrived from Castle Black bearing a single, grim message: the Night's Watch can no longer contain the dead. Large-scale attacks have begun. We are retreating to Winterfell to make our stand. Jon Snow. Tyrion felt his heart pound as he read those words. He hurried to Sansa, who read the parchment with pale cheeks. She looked up, horror shining in her eyes. They're falling back. That means the wall is lost. Tyrion could only guess. Or near to it. Perhaps they held as long as they could. We have to prepare, Sansa. The final battle might be here, at Winterfell. She steeled herself, setting her jaw. Then we ready ourselves. Sound the horns, gather the people inside the walls. Every capable fighter must stand with us. Let the rest shelter in the winter town if we run out of space. It's time. That day, horns blared from Winterfell's battlements, summoning all to arms. Smiths toiled in a frenzy, forging arrowheads and shoring up weapons. Civilians poured inside, families huddling in the corridors and storerooms. Snow whipped across the courtyards in frigid gusts. Sansa, clad in a thick cloak lined with wolf fur, took command of the castle's interior arrangements, ensuring no corridor was clogged, no stores inaccessible. Tyrion scoured the ramparts with the captains, designating vantage points for archers, planning how to deploy what obsidian they had. An air of grim acceptance suffused the keep. Some wept quietly, others prayed. A number sharpened their blades with stoic resignation. Still others raged, preferring to go down in a blaze of defiance rather than cower. As night fell, Tyrion stood on the walls, scanning the northern horizon for any sign of approaching torches or fires. Only the endless darkness stretched beyond, occasionally lit by a swirl of blowing snow. It was as though the world held its breath. The next day passed in tense anticipation. Then the next and the next. At last, on the fifth day, watchers on the walls spied distant figures approaching. At first, there was confusion. The silhouettes were ragged, stumbling. But soon the call went up that they were men wearing black, accompanied by wildlings. Word rippled through the castle. The gates opened cautiously to admit them. Jon Snow arrived at Winterfell once more, this time with far fewer men than he had left with. Exhaustion clung to him, his face lined with sorrow. Tormund staggered beside him, an ugly wound bandaged across his chest. Scores of battered survivors followed. Night's Watchmen, wildlings, and northern volunteers who had marched up the King's Road. Their eyes told of horrors witnessed. Some half collapsed as they passed through the gates. Others limped, leaning on comrades. Sansa rushed forward, grabbing Jon's arm. How bad is it? He fixed her with a haunted look. The wall, portions of it near Eastwatch have fallen. The Night King came with a dragon of ice and blue flame, or so it seemed. We couldn't hold. The dead poured through the breach. We lost hundreds. Those of us who survived did so by riding as fast as we could. The walkers are marching south. They could be upon us in days. Stunned silence clutched the courtyard. Tyrion felt a cold dread coil in his gut. An ice dragon? Then Daenerys Targaryen must have reached Westeros, or at least somewhere near the wall. Her dragons were rumored to be the only living ones. Could it be that one had been turned by the White Walkers, made into a white? The very idea froze Tyrion's blood. If the dead had a dragon, how in the gods' names could Winterfell stand? Jon's eyes, fever-bright with grief, swept the crowd. We do not yield. We make our stand here. Ready the walls, gather all the obsidian. The dead might arrive in a day or in a week, but they are coming. We either live through this night or die in it. No one spoke. The wind moaned in the silent courtyard. Tyrion sensed the magnitude of the moment. This was what everything had led to, from Tyrion's flight north to the toppling of the Boltons to the forging of alliances. Now the unstoppable tide had broken through the last barrier. Winterfell stood alone on the brink of an unfathomable war, a war not for crowns or gold, but for survival itself. He looked around at the battered men, at Sansa's pale but determined face, at Jon's haunted gaze, at the Northmen gripping their swords. Then he drew a breath and steeled his own nerves. If they had but one night to hold out, one chance to defy the undead, they would fight with every resource, every scrap of cunning. Tyrion Lannister had once defended King's Landing against a fleet with wildfire. Now he would defend the north against an endless horde of the dead. So be it. As the sky darkened, horns sounded along the walls. Torches flared. Archers took positions, swordsmen lined the battlements. One more day, one last stand. Snow gusted across the courtyard. Tyrion gripped the cold stone of the rampart, gazing into the gloom, heart thudding in his chest. Daenerys Targaryen had not yet arrived. No southern banners flew to their aid. No miracle reinforcements galloped over the horizon. It was only them, the defenders of Winterfell, dwarfed by the cosmic scale of the threat. Yet in the flickering torchlight, Tyrion glimpsed the determined faces of men and women who refused to kneel before death. At their head stood Jon Snow, a man who had died once and fought his way back to protect the living, and Sansa Stark, who had overcome every cruelty mortal men could inflict to reclaim her home. They were steel-tempered by the harshest fires. If anything could defy the White Walkers, it might be this unity forged in adversity. Tyrion wrapped his cloak tighter around himself. The chill bit at his bones, but he felt a faint spark of heat in his chest, the warmth of hope as fragile as the flame of a single candle in a howling winter storm. That single candle might be snuffed out at any moment, but it still burned, defiant to the last. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and braced for the night that was about to fall on them all. If this was the end, he would stand with the North unbowed. If there was a dawn beyond this darkness, perhaps they would all see a world remade in the wake of the horrors. Either way, Tyrion Lannister would face it here, far from his family's twisting corridors of power, with no illusions but one final cause worth fighting for. Tyrion stood on Winterfell's ramparts as a pale sun struggled over the horizon. Its light was wan and fitful, filtered through the low-hanging clouds. The air was bitter, each breath slicing cold into the lungs. Soldiers peered northward across open fields and frozen roads, hands gripping spears and bows wrapped in cloth to keep them from icing over. None spoke. They all knew what was coming. The dead marching south from the shattered wall, and the unknown horror of that reanimated dragon said to breathe a terrible blue fire capable of tearing ancient stone asunder. Word of the Night's Watch retreat had sent a chill deeper than any winter's breeze through every soul in Winterfell. The planning and preparation of the last weeks had aimed at one outcome: to hold the seat of the North for as long as possible. No one could say how many thousands of whites advanced now, or which route the White Walkers would choose, but they knew the clash was inevitable. Some of the watchers on the wall prayed the enemy might need more time to reorganize after taking the wall. Others wondered if the White Walkers even needed rest. Tyrion, for his part, doubted they did. He couldn't help recalling stories he had read in the old texts, legends of whites that did not tire, of White Walkers who drifted through the snow like silent phantoms. Now all those tales were real, wearing the faces of countless corpses raised to serve a single, inexorable will. Before, he had thought war was the greatest horror, the butchery of men by other men. Now, at the edge of the world's end, it seemed that war among the living had been little more than a petty, distracting prologue. He glanced to his left, where a group of archers huddled against the battlements. They wore thick furs and carried quivers filled with obsidian-tipped arrows. Once, the idea of a black glass arrow killing something more dangerous than a normal man would have seemed bizarre. But these times were not normal. Tyrion had spent days ensuring the forging of those arrowheads, binding them to sturdy shafts. He had seen to the distribution of whatever dragonglass remained from the caches that had trickled in from distant corners of the north. There was never enough. They had precious few spears and swords fitted with obsidian edges. He feared it would run out quickly once the melee began. He descended from the wall with careful steps, mindful of the ice underfoot. The courtyard bristled with a kind of grim industry, men checking their weapons, women carting water and provisions to the storerooms, younger squires assisting the blacksmiths as they hammered last-minute fittings onto the spikes that now ringed Winterfell's ramparts. Sansa Stark's orders had been precise: fill every corner of the keep with supplies so that, should the outer walls be breached, defenders might fall back to the Great Keep or even the crypts. If the castle had to be fought for inch by inch, so be it. Tyrion had never heard of a siege by an enemy that did not eat, sleep, or negotiate. That alone made every attempt at standard fortress tactics feel almost inadequate. But there was no better plan. Past the smithy, Sansa stood near a row of newly placed stakes, speaking with a small cluster of officers. Her posture was tall, shoulders back, her cloak rippling in the breeze. She wore gloves that matched the dark wolf fur trim on her hood. At first glance, one might have thought her composed, but Tyrion had come to know the subtle signs of her worry. The slight compression of her lips, the flicker of tension in her eyes as she listened to the men give their reports. She had not slept well, none of them had, yet she remained calm, an anchor for everyone else's fears. Tyrion waited patiently for her conversation to end. One officer saluted and peeled away, heading toward the inner gate. Sansa turned, saw Tyrion, and gave him a nod of acknowledgement. He approached quietly. "Any word from the scouts?" he asked, voice subdued. She shook her head. "No." The last rider reported seeing a mass of footprints and trampled snow near the gift, along with frozen corpses along the roadside. Some men, some animals. By the time they arrived, the whites were gone, likely continuing south. But we've yet to receive an exact location of the main host. Tyrion grimaced. "So we don't know if we have days or hours." "Precisely." Sansa exhaled, glancing around the busy courtyard. "We're doing all we can." "Are the dragonglass catapult shots in place?" "As many as we could manage," Tyrion confirmed. The blacksmiths melted smaller fragments of dragonglass into lumps, then coated them with pitch. "We'll load them into the catapults. When lit, they might shatter among the whites. But it's an untested method. We're improvising." "Everything here is improvisation," she said with a quiet bitterness. Then she straightened. "Lord Manderly is verifying that all gate mechanisms are functional. I just spoke with Lady Mormont. She's stationed in the courtyard with her Bear Island men. They refuse to hide in the keep, of course." Tyrion allowed a faint smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less from her." Then his smile faded. "Jon is on the ramparts, I assume?" Sansa nodded. "He arrived with Tormund a few hours ago. They've been coordinating defensive positions. Some nights he hardly rests. I can tell he's still reeling from what happened at the wall. He lost so many. We all did." She swallowed, eyes glimmering with sorrow. "But we've no time to grieve properly. Not yet." Tyrion inclined his head. "If I might speak with him, do you think he'd welcome my counsel?" "I'm sure he would. This isn't King's Landing, Tyrion. You've more than proven your loyalty." He felt a subtle warmth at her words, though these were hardly times for comfort. "I'll find him, then. Let us hope we still have time for any last improvements." He turned, weaving his way through the crowd of soldiers and helpers. The air smelled of soot and sweat, of anticipation. The memories of King's Landing's battle preparations came unbidden. The day he oversaw the wildfire placed along the Blackwater, the desperate measures. That time, he had fought to defend a city from another army of living men. This was so different that the comparison felt faintly absurd. Yet that old spark of defiance, that cunning that had once preserved the capital, still lived in him. He might be a dwarf with no skill in a sword fight, but he had a mind that could plan and adapt. He reached the main steps leading to the ramparts overlooking the northern approach. Jon Snow stood at the top of those steps, speaking with two of his men. Ghost, the enormous albino dire wolf, lounged at Jon's side, ears perked, pink eyes watchful. The men parted when Tyrion approached, leaving Jon to greet him. Clad in black and gray leathers, cloak swirling behind him, Jon appeared every inch the reluctant king. His face bore new lines, the set of his mouth grim. "Tyrion," he said by way of greeting, glancing down the steps to ensure no one else was listening. "Sansa told me you're overseeing the catapult modifications." "Yes," Tyrion replied. "They're as ready as they can be. The engineers have placed them around the outer walls with pitch and dragon glass lumps. We'll see if it has any real effect." Jon nodded. "Good. We'll need every advantage." Tyrion studied him a moment. "How fares Tormund? He looked battered when you both arrived." "He took a wound in the last skirmish against the Whites, nothing mortal, the maesters say. But he won't rest. He's determined to stand at the front when they come." Jon cast a glance at the distant line of trees as if he could will the enemy to appear. "We lost so many at the wall, Tyrion. We held for days, then that dragon attacked. Blue fire, it burned colder and hotter at the same time. The ice around the base of the wall shattered. Stones that stood for centuries came down as if made of sand." The memory clearly weighed on him. Tyrion had gleaned only bits and pieces about the undead dragon. He asked softly, "Do you think it will come here?" Jon's dark gaze flickered. "Yes. If the Night King wants to break Winterfell's walls, he has a ready weapon to match anything we've built. All we can do is pray it's not unstoppable. Maybe dragon glass projectiles, or if we had a dragon of our own," he trailed off, biting his lip. Tyrion suspected that Jon was thinking about the rumored Targaryen queen, Daenerys, who might or might not set foot on Westeros in time. If she did, would she come to the north first or strike for King's Landing? None could say. Tyrion understood that after the fall of the Wall, the realm's usual war over the Iron Throne seemed almost meaningless. But Daenerys might not see it that way. She might want the throne above all else, ignoring the threat until it was too late, or, if rumors of her compassion held true, perhaps she was sailing north at that very moment. There was no word, no raven carrying tidings of her approach. Jon clenched his fists at the rampart's edge. "We posted watchers to the west in case she or anyone else sails into White Harbor. They'd be fools to do so in winter seas, but these are desperate times. I wish we knew more. We can't fight that white dragon with normal means." Tyrion laid a hand on the cold stone. "If the living can unify, maybe we stand a chance. But for now, we must rely on what we have. When the dead come, we'll do what we can to stop them here." Jon nodded slowly. "All right. Help me with the plan. Manderly is organizing ground defenses in the courtyard. I need you to coordinate the watchers on the inner battlements. Sansa will direct the fallback routes. Once they break through the outer walls, if they do, everyone withdraws in phases to the next ring of defense." Tyrion listened carefully as Jon outlined the fallback positions. Winterfell's inner courtyards and keeps had been barricaded with wooden palisades. Old tunnels beneath the walls had been collapsed to prevent infiltration from below. Some stone passages leading from the crypts were sealed. Others were designated as final refuge areas if the walls fell. It was all grim, a layered strategy to stave off a nightmarish foe. The plan included signals, horn blasts, bells, torches set ablaze in different patterns to indicate each step of retreat. Tyrion knew a chaotic, swirling battle at night risked confusion, and confusion could be fatal. He voiced a few suggestions, making sure the runners had multiple routes, ensuring that once the catapults had fired their dragonglass lumps, they wouldn't be overrun by whites. Jon considered it all, adjusting details. By the time they finished, the sun was dipping behind Winterfell's towers, leaving the sky awash in purples and oranges streaked with gray. The nights had grown so long that even a pale afternoon light felt fleeting. Jon turned to gaze over the land. "We'll keep scouts out until we know the enemy is near. Then we call everyone inside, seal the gates. After that, it's just us. The living in here, the dead out there." Tyrion nodded, heart heavy. "Let us hope we still see a dawn after the night is done." They parted ways, each with tasks to finalize. Tyrion crossed the courtyard, nodding to guards who watched him pass with solemn respect. When he reached the Great Hall, he found a flurry of last-minute activity, casks of water, barrels of pitch, sacks of flour, to feed the keep should a siege drag out. The large space seemed smaller than ever, with so many supplies crammed into corners. In truth, a siege by the dead might not last in a typical sense. If the White Walkers overcame the outer defenses, the living might be slaughtered in a matter of hours. The old concept of holding out felt like a dim relic of a more reasonable war. Winding his way through the hall, Tyrion ascended a short flight of steps leading to a corridor that took him to the library tower. He ducked inside to gather any relevant scrolls or maps he might need for final reference. Maester Wolkan was there, hunched over a table, carefully storing old manuscripts in chests. If the keep fell, the library's knowledge might be lost. The maester looked up at Tyrion's entrance. Any new developments, my lord? Vulcan asked softly. I'm no lord, Tyrion reminded him by habit. And no, nothing new except that we wait for an army of corpses. He gave a thin smile. But if you can find any last scrap of knowledge about how to kill an undead dragon, we'd be in your debt. Vulcan sighed. I fear the old texts speak only of the living dragons, or at best some half-mythic references to white-like creatures. I have found no record of a reanimated dragon in the histories. Tyrion expected as much. Then we trust to Dragoglass and pray some stroke of luck might cripple it. He gathered a small roll of maps showing Winterfell's layout and the lands immediately surrounding the castle. The outskirts of the winter town, the fields beyond, the King's Road snaking south. If by some miracle they had to plan a breakout or coordinate a retreat, these might be helpful. Realistically, Tyrion doubted a large-scale retreat could succeed. The best they could do was hold the fortress or die trying. He thanked Vulcan and left the library. Outside, dusk was settling quickly. He made his way to the corner of the courtyard where a brazier blazed. A handful of men warmed their hands, exchanging quiet conversation about their families or the approaching doom. Tyrion closed his eyes for a moment, letting the fire's heat brush his face. He remembered the first day he truly felt the cold of the north, stepping onto the docks at White Harbor. He had come to escape a life in King's Landing that no longer felt like his. Now, ironically, he stood on the brink of a battle that might claim him anyway. Yet he did not regret the choice. In King's Landing, he would have been alone, despised, or dead by Cersei's hand. Here, he had found a cause to which he could devote what little skill he possessed. Night fell with a hush that somehow felt louder than any roar of battle. Torches guttered in the growing wind, their flames dancing. Tyrion caught a glimpse of Sansa again, crossing the courtyard with a cloak thrown over her shoulders. She paused to speak with Lady Mormont, that fierce child who wore command like a second skin. Then Sansa spotted Tyrion and inclined her head slightly, beckoning him to follow as she headed for the keep. He followed her inside, up a twisting stair to a small solar that had become the ad hoc council room. She lit a candle on a table, its soft glow revealing the tension carved into her features. Tyrion wondered if she'd eaten anything in the last day. She looked pale beneath the flickering light. There's one matter we've avoided, she said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. If the worst happens, we might need to evacuate some people through the Godswood Gate. But that would leave them in the open fields. Is there any sense in sending them south in the night, with the White Walkers so close? Tyrion thought of frightened families trying to flee while the Whites poured over the land. I don't see how. Even if they made it past the initial wave, the roads are thick with snow. And if you recall the stories, Whites do not always stay in a single column. They spread out, hunting. That path might be as deadly as remaining here. She rubbed her temples. Then we are cornered. No real escape plan. That's the nature of this war, Tyrion said gently. Every path is dangerous, but staying in a fortified seat is still the best chance to survive. If the undead come in unstoppable numbers, there is no place for a mass exodus to go. At least here we have walls. She sank into a chair, shoulders drooping for just an instant before she regained composure. Thank you, Tyrion. I'm sorry. I know you can't conjure a perfect solution. He placed a hand on the back of another chair, glancing at her. No one can, but we do what we can with the time we have. They heard movement in the hallway, and Robert Glover entered, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. He gave a slight bow. My lady, we've finished distributing provisions to every fallback point. There's a question of how to position the remaining reserves. The archers want them near the walls to resupply, but others think they should remain in the second courtyard. Which is it? Sansa sighed, pushing herself to her feet. Let's place half near the walls, half in the courtyard. We can shift them as needed. She looked to Tyrion. Would you join us for one more council of war? I fear it might be the last one before the fight arrives. He nodded. Together, they left the solar, heading to meet the key figures. Manderly, Glover, Lady Mormont, a few others from lesser houses, plus Tormund if he was in any state to attend. The council assembled in the great hall, overshadowed by the gloom of the torches. Tormund stood, leaning on a table, his thick beard bristling. When Sansa explained the final distribution of reserves, Tormund gave a grunt of approval. I will need men in both places. The dead can come straight on or climb over the walls like spiders, I hear. Best we be ready. The conversation lingered over small but vital details, how to signal if the undead attempted to tunnel under the walls, they'd placed watchers by the cellars, how to handle civilian panic, how best to preserve the dragonglass-laden catapults for an opportune moment. Then they spoke of how to deal with the undead dragon if it appeared. Silence fell. No one had a real answer. Arrows tipped with dragonglass might be fired, catapults might fling lumps of it in the sky, but hitting a flying beast at night in the midst of chaos seemed a wild gamble. Sansa's eyes darted to Tyrion. He just shook his head. He could plan for many things, but not that. When the council ended, the gathered men and women offered each other subdued farewells, uncertain if they'd ever see dawn together. Tyrion watched as they parted, some clasping arms, some exchanging grim jokes. This was how people faced the end. It reminded him of the Blackwater battle, but with the stakes magnified 1,000-fold. He stepped outside into the courtyard, half expecting to see an army of wights cresting the nearest hill. But the night was still, albeit freezing. Stars gleamed faintly through shifting clouds. The torches along the walls flickered, illuminating watchers who peered outward, scanning. Tyrion inhaled the crisp air, tasting iron. He felt an ache in his legs, partly from tension, partly from the cold. One step at a time, he told himself. One moment at a time. The hours dragged on. The horns remained silent, no cry of alarm. Some men dozed in corners, weapons in hand. Others paced. Tyrion tried to rest for a brief while in a small bunk off the hall, but sleep refused him. Instead, he lay there, eyes open, mind conjuring all the worst outcomes. He wondered if, by morning, they'd all be wights themselves, trudging southward to devour the realm. In that dark space, he allowed himself a moment of bleak reflection. If I must die, he thought, at least I'll do so in a cause I believe in. A dull gray light crept over the castle, revealing that the snows had thickened overnight. Dawn arrived as a smear of colorless sky behind swirling flakes. Tyrion rose from his bunk and found the courtyard quieter than the night before. Some watchers had changed shifts. He saw Sansa conferring with Manderly by the stable, their breath-forming clouds. Tormund was nowhere to be seen, perhaps on the walls. He approached Sansa, who signaled Manderly to wait a moment. Any sign? Tyrion asked. Not yet, Sansa said, though tension edged her voice. We still have scouts out. The roads are nearly impassable in places, but the undead aren't slowed by drifts as men are. They might be close. As she spoke, a horn's call shattered the morning's uneasy hush. The first note was long and low, echoing across the courtyard. Everyone froze, hearts pounding. A second horn blast followed, then a third. Tyrion's stomach lurched. 3 blasts had always meant White Walkers if the old legends of the Night's Watch were to be believed. Even if the Watchers here used a different system, there was no question, the alarm had been sounded. A scout galloped in through the open gate, his horse lathered in sweat despite the cold, eyes rolling white. The scout practically fell from the saddle, staggering toward Sansa. My lady, they're coming. Thousands, tens of thousands. They crest the horizon, maybe an hour's march, not far from the tree-line west of the King's Road. We saw them. God save us, there's so many. Sansa's face blanched. She turned to the guard at the gate. Seal it. Sound the signal for all scouts to return. Everyone inside the walls. Now. Chaos erupted. People rushed to obey. The massive outer gates, reinforced with iron and newly fitted timbers, began to groan shut. Horns blared again. Tyrion sprinted to the southwestern corner of the wall, where a vantage allowed a partial view of the open land. He scrambled up the steps, clinging to the frosty stone. At the rampart, the wind cut at his face. Jon was already there, flanked by a handful of black-cloaked men. Ghost prowled behind him. Jon lifted a spyglass to his eye, scanning the white expanse. Tyrion could see it even without magnification, a dark, moving mass rippling across the snowy plain. It reminded him of ants or locusts, but these were human shapes, twisted by death. A low sound floated on the wind, like a distant scraping or moaning. The scout had been right. The undead were legion. They'll be upon us soon, Jon said, lowering the spyglass. His voice was taut with grim resignation. So it begins. He signaled a nearby soldier, who raised a horn to his lips and blew. The echo rang across Winterfell's courtyards. Immediately, men rushed to the battlements, forming ranks. Archers donned quivers of obsidian-tipped arrows. Spearmen readied their pikes. The catapult crews hauled their lumps of pitch-coated dragoglass shot into place. From below, Tyrion heard the bark of commands, the clang of swords. The entire castle braced itself. Tyrion forced himself to keep a clear mind. He turned to a group of archers near the catapult on the southwestern wall. "You'll wait for the signal before firing," he reminded them. "We want to strike at close range to maximize effect." They nodded, eyes wide. Jon heard him and came over. "I'll have archers line the entire western side. Tormund and I will coordinate the front rampart. Tyrion, can you manage the southwestern catapults and keep watch for any flanking maneuvers?" Tyrion gave a sharp nod. "Yes. Count on me." A deep breath steadied him. He turned back to peer at the wave of undead. They were closer now. He could make out individual silhouettes, some wearing the tattered remnants of cloaks, others little more than skeletal remains. Their eyes glowed with an eerie blue light. Among them stalked taller figures. White Walkers, their ice-bladed spears glinting in the pale day. The sight of so many evoked a primal dread in Tyrion's gut. This was no ordinary foe. But there was no time for fear. Only action. A whistling wind whipped over the walls, scattering snow across the parapets. Below, the gates were locked. The columns of defenders manned every vantage. Sansa stood in the courtyard, conferring with Manderly. Tyrion suspected she would move to the inner defenses when the fighting began in earnest, to coordinate from a safer vantage. He was grateful for that. She was no warrior, but her leadership would be crucial if the outer walls fell. Like a slow tide, the undead army approached. Within minutes, they were near enough that Tyrion could see their slack jaws, their twisted limbs. A nauseating wave of decay filled the air. A few of the whites moved with surprising speed, others stumbled along. The White Walkers themselves walked with an almost casual stride, as though they had all the time in the world. And in truth, they did. The defenders waited, hearts pounding. Then, at Jon's shouted command, the first volley of arrows soared from the walls. Hundreds of obsidian-tipped shafts arced through the sky, black silhouettes against gray clouds. They rained down on the front ranks of the whites. Tyrion held his breath. Where obsidian struck, whites crumpled in flurries of bone and dust. Some arrows missed, landing in the snow or lodging in dead flesh to no effect. But enough found their marks that the front rank collapsed by the dozens. For a moment, Tyrion felt a surge of hope. They can be killed. But the whites behind simply surged over the fallen, climbing over bodies in a relentless press. Another volley. More whites dropped. Still they came, unstoppable as a riptide. Tyrion could see the White Walkers in the midst, untouched by arrows. Their unnatural presence spurred the whites onward. "Catapults!" Jon roared from further down the wall. "Loose!" The crews lit the lumps of dragonglass pitch and hurled them. Tyrion shielded his face from the glare. Flaming orbs sailed into the mass of undead, shattering on impact. Some exploded in bursts of fire and obsidian shards. Entire clusters of whites were torn apart by the impact, dark limbs flying. Screeches filled the air. Tyrion wanted to cheer, but the wave kept coming, unstoppable, filling the gaps in their own ranks. It was as though for every white destroyed, another stepped forward. And then, without warning, the White Walkers raised their arms in eerie unison. A freezing gale whipped across the field. Tyrion felt it strike like the teeth of winter, penetrating cloak and flesh. He saw a shimmering haze in the air, and suddenly a swirl of icy mist coalesced near the foot of the walls. It formed a bank of thick fog, creeping upward like a living thing, climbing the stones. Men on the battlements coughed, blinking through the rising cloud. Visibility dropped, turning the lower portion of the battlefield into a swirling mass of gray. The whites pressed onward in that cloak of mist, now nearly at the foot of the walls. Archers tried to aim downward, but the swirling frost concealed their targets. Tyrion cursed under his breath. The White Walkers were cunning enough to blind them at the critical moment. Down in the courtyard, he heard horns blare, the signal that the enemy was at the walls. Men with spears lined the parapets, waiting. Some of the whites began clawing at the gates or scrabbling up the stone. Tyrion glimpsed skeletal hands clutching the edges of the battlements before arrows and spears drove them away. From somewhere within that roiling fog, an unearthly shriek erupted. A sound that made Tyrion's blood turn to ice. The pitch of it soared, echoing across Winterfell. A hush fell among the defenders. Even the wind seemed to pause in terror. Then the shriek came again, deeper and more furious, and Tyrion realized with a sickening lurch that it was the cry of a dragon. An undead dragon. He looked up, heart thudding, scanning the skies. At first, he saw nothing but clouds. Then, faintly at the edge of his vision, a shape emerged. A massive silhouette gliding toward Winterfell from the north, wings tattered and dark. Blue light gleamed in its eye sockets. Tyrion remembered old tales of Valyrian dragons with roars that shook the heavens. But this creature's cry was something else entirely, as if the storm itself was shrieking. An outcry rose from the defenders on the walls. "Dragon! Dragon!" Men pointed, some fumbled with bows. Tyrion stared in horror as the undead dragon swept lower, heading toward the southwestern flank where he stood. The beast's jaws opened, revealing a glow of sickly blue fire swirling within. The watchers on the ramparts scrambled. "Fire the catapult!" Tyrion yelled, voice cracking. The crew hurried to light another dragonglass-laden shot. The contraption creaked, flinging a flaming orb into the sky. It soared wide, missing the dragon by some margin. The great undead shape circled, letting out another shriek that rattled the stones. Then it dived, spew. A torrent of blue flame. Tyrion threw himself down, covering his head. The flames struck the battlements some yards away, shattering stone with an ear-splitting crack. The impact flung men from the walls, their screams lost in the roar. The blast wave pummeled Tyrion, dust and shards of stone pelted his back. For several heartbeats he could hear nothing but ringing in his ears. When he rose, coughing, the southwestern rampart was a smoking ruin. Chunks of rubble spilled down onto the field below. A gap had opened in the wall, wide enough for whites to climb through if they reached it. The catapult stood half-broken, smoldering. Several of its crew lay motionless. Tyrion's head spun, but he forced himself to think clearly. "To me," he shouted to anyone within earshot. "Archers, regroup." A few men stumbled over, eyes wild. He pointed to the break in the wall. "Form a line there, plug that gap. We can't let them pour in." The men hurried, battered but determined. Another roar from the dragon reverberated overhead, but it banked away, possibly circling for another attack. Now the whites were at the damaged section of the wall. Through the swirling mist, Tyrion could see them lurching forward, climbing rubble. The first ranks emerged, half-rotten bodies reaching out with claw-like fingers. Shouts of alarm rang from the defenders. Arrows flew, some whites crumpling to dust when the obsidian struck home. Others pushed past, heedless. Tyrion saw a soldier lunge with a spear, impaling one white, only to have two more latch onto him from the side. He screamed, toppling over the stones. Chaos erupted in that narrow breach. Tyrion found himself yanking out his dagger. He only had a small obsidian piece fitted into the blade. He'd never been a formidable warrior, but he would fight if it came to it. The whites pressed forward. A Northman to Tyrion's right hacked with a sword, decapitating a white. Another soldier thrust a dragonglass-dipped pike, and another white fell. But still they came unstoppable. One lunged at Tyrion, a twisted face, mouth open in silent snarl. Tyrion slashed reflexively, the obsidian blade biting into its neck. A burst of dust and brittle bone erupted, and the white collapsed. Tyrion gasped for breath. That had been too close. "Fall back, keep them from pushing through," someone yelled. Men tried to hold the breach. Tyrion glimpsed Tormund smashing a white skull with his axe, roaring defiance as blood dripped from a wound on his temple. The Free Folk champion had come to reinforce the southwestern side, brandishing a torch in one hand and axe in the other, hacking at the undead with furious abandon. Flames danced around him as he ignited the pitch on fallen lumps of dragonglass, hoping to spread fire in the breach. For a moment, they managed to stem the tide. Then the White Walkers themselves drew closer. Tyrion saw them striding through the mass of whites, tall and slender, skin like pale ice, eyes burning blue. One raised a spear of crystallized ice and hurled it at the defenders. The spear struck a hapless soldier, skewering him through his chest plate as though it were parchment. Another White Walker lifted a hand, conjuring swirling gusts of icy wind that extinguished Tormund's torch. The big man cursed, continuing to fight in near darkness. The whites advanced again. Winterfell's horns sounded from another portion of the wall, signaling more breaches. Tyrion's heart hammered. The undead dragon's screech echoed overhead, followed by another blast of that hideous blue flame somewhere else along the battlements. The entire fortress trembled. Screams and the clash of steel rose in a dreadful cacophony. Tyrion realized with sick dread that they could not hold every section if the dragon kept blasting holes. Amid the swirl of confusion, ghostly shapes of white slithered through the gaps. Tyrion fought to keep his footing, parrying a white's lunge with his dagger, finishing it with a desperate slash. A second white grabbed him from behind. He felt cold fingers scrabbling at his cloak. He twisted, stabbing blindly. The blade found its mark, and the thing collapsed into dust. Tyrion staggered away, panting. Tormund roared something in the old tongue, hacking at the whites with unstoppable fury. Behind him, a few archers tried to maintain fire, but they were pinned down by the swirling mist that still clung to the base of the walls. Men coughed, frost rhyming their hair. The White Walker that had thrown the spear glided forward, leveling its weapon at Tormund. Tyrion realized in horror that Tormund was cornered by a cluster of whites. The walker took aim. "Watch out!" Tyrion yelled, though his voice was nearly lost in the din. Tormund turned just as the walker launched the spear. He tried to dodge, but it caught his shoulder, sending him crashing back with a cry. Before the walker could finish him, one of Tormund's wildling comrades tackled the whites that swarmed him. Tormund scrambled away, clutching his bleeding shoulder. In the midst of that chaos, Tyrion glimpsed Sansa on the ramparts to the east, frantically waving at men to pull back. So the order had been given. The defenders were to retreat into the inner courtyard. The southwestern wall was compromised. Tyrion grabbed the nearest soldier's arm, shouting, "Fall back. We can't hold here." The soldier nodded, face pale, and relayed the message. They began a fighting withdrawal, stepping backward over rubble, trying to keep the whites at bay long enough to retreat inside. Tormund, breathing raggedly, managed to stand with a grimace, leaning on his axe. "Go, dwarf," he barked. "I'll be right behind you." Tyrion didn't argue. He stumbled over the debris, almost losing his footing, and clambered down the inner side of the collapsed wall. The whites followed, howling in voiceless hunger. Arrows rained from above, picking some off, but too many remained. The retreating defenders sprinted across the courtyard, passing the main stables. Another wave of horns, the second ring of defenses, was about to come into play. Sansa and manderly were there, waving the men through a narrow gate into the next courtyard. "Inside, hurry!" Sansa cried, her voice trembling but resolute. She wore a short sword at her hip, though Tyrion doubted she intended to draw it unless cornered. With her free hand, she gestured for the gates to be shut once the last defenders had crossed. Tyrion made it inside that second courtyard, turning to see Tormund and a handful of wildlings scramble in, covered in blood and soot. The gates slammed behind them, bracing with heavy crossbars. They had sealed off the southwestern approach, leaving the whites to flood the outer courtyard. Tyrion could hear them battering the gate already, shrieks rising. Panting, he looked around. This second courtyard was a fallback area, ringed with newly erected wooden barricades. Archers stood on walkways above, their faces set in grim lines. Sansa moved among them, conferring with manderly. Jon Snow appeared from another direction, sword drawn, spattered with blood. Ghost trotted at his side, muzzle stained black with gore. Jon locked eyes with Sansa in a brief moment of understanding. The outer defenses had been breached, but they were still alive. Jon turned to the men. "We hold here or fall. Defend these barricades with your lives. Archers, form ranks up top. Spearmen, brace for the gate to break." Tyrion forced himself to steady his breathing. "Jon, the southwestern wall is destroyed," he managed. "The dragon blasted it open. We tried to contain the whites, but it's happening everywhere," Jon said, voice taut. "The dragon hit the northern rampart too. We had to pull back. The whites are swarming in. Our only hope is to hold this courtyard long enough to thin them out. If we lose this ground, we retreat to the keep." Tormund spat, his arm dangling from the spear wound. "We can't let them corner us in the keep. That damned beast will rip it open." "It might," Jon admitted, "but we have no choice. We fight them yard by yard." Another thunderous crash echoed from the southwestern gate. The crossbars groaned. Tyrion glanced at the barricades, which were relatively fresh timber. He feared they would not withstand prolonged battering. Overhead, the undead dragon shrieked once more. The gloom of day had grown darker with the swirling snow and acrid smoke. Figures ran to and fro, passing along new quivers of arrows or hauling the wounded to the maesters in the great hall. The air reeked of death. Jon stepped closer to Tyrion. "We need to keep some sense of coordination, or we'll be overrun in every corner. Take command of the far side, near the smithy. I'll handle this gate. Sansa and manderly will see to the central area. Go." Tyrion nodded, swallowing hard. He dashed across the courtyard, passing groups of soldiers forming up. Near the smithy, a hastily erected wooden barrier blocked a small side passage. He positioned archers on a makeshift walkway, shouted to spearmen below to brace themselves. Already, Tyrion could hear whites scrabbling at the walls beyond, seeking any gap. Across the yard, the southwestern gate finally gave under the onslaught, splintering with a deafening crack. Whites poured through, only to be met by volley after volley of obsidian arrows. Dozens fell, turning to dust, but more clawed their way in behind them. Shouting erupted as the defenders engaged, swords flashing. A swirl of bodies collided in the chaos, steel clanging on bone. The White Walkers advanced behind their mindless thralls, their presence intensifying the frigid air. Tyrion barked orders, helping to guide arrow fire where it might do the most good. Men on the walkway loosed a barrage into the mass of whites funneling through the remains of the gate. He spotted Tormund bellowing a war cry, bounding into the fray with his axe. Sansa had vanished from sight, presumably coordinating from the central courtyard. Tyrion prayed she stayed safe. A fresh wave of whites appeared along the southern perimeter, scaling the damaged walls with impossible agility. Archers pivoted to intercept them. Tyrion saw one soldier dragged off the walkway, his screams cut short as the whites tore into him. Another guard shoved a white backward with a spear, only for 3 more to swarm over the barricade. The courtyard began to fill with the dead, forcing the living to retreat toward the keep's main doors. "Fall back to the keep," someone yelled. Tyrion recognized Lady Mormont's voice, sharp and fierce over the din. She was in the thick of the fighting, a sword in her hand, slashing at the knee of a white that towered over her. With a snarl, she brought it down, but more attacked from behind. A wildling soldier pulled her away just in time, shouting that they must retreat. The flood of whites from all sides was too great. The defenders had no choice but to give ground. Tyrion found himself swept in a tide of panicked men and women, trying to keep some formation as they moved toward the inner doors of the Great Keep. He turned, firing one last arrow from a dropped bow, striking a white in the skull. It disintegrated, but not before a second white slammed into Tyrion, knocking him down. He landed hard, breath whooshing out. The creature snapped its jaws, reeking of rot. Tyrion fumbled for his dagger. A small voice in his mind noted how final this felt. Then a spear tip appeared through the white's chest. It crumbled, revealing Tormund behind it, panting. "Up, dwarf!" Tormund growled, yanking him upright. "Move!" Tyrion coughed, stumbling. "I owe you a..." "Later. Run." They joined the mass of defenders pouring through the keep doors. Archers remained on the upper floors, shooting downward to cover the retreat. Once enough people were inside, the doors were slammed shut and barricaded. Outside, the courtyard was lost, whites crawling over barricades, some setting upon the wounded who hadn't made it. Tyrion's stomach churned. They had no time for regrets. The keep's halls were cramped with survivors, many wounded. The stench of sweat and blood thickened the air. Cries of pain echoed. Maesters tried to tend injuries, but there were too many. Sansa appeared, her eyes wide, hair disheveled, guiding a small group of refugees deeper inside. She spotted Tyrion and Tormund rushing to them. "They've broken through every outer line," she gasped. "We have men up on the 2nd and 3rd floors. If we can hold the main hallway, we might keep them out for a time. But the dragon, if it blasts the keep..." A thunderous roar shook the entire structure. Fragments of plaster fell from the ceiling. Tyrion's heart leapt. The undead dragon must have hit part of the keep. Another explosion sounded from above. The corridor trembled. A portion of the upper floor collapsed in a cascade of rubble. Screams. A swirl of dust. Winterfell was coming apart under that monstrous assault. Tyrion coughed, blinking away grit, and clutched Sansa's arm to steady her. Tormund shielded his head from falling debris. Jon Snow emerged from a side passage, flanked by Ghost and a handful of black-cloaked men. He looked half-dead from exhaustion, but his eyes blazed with determination. Upstairs, the roof, some of the archers are trying to hit the dragon. "We can't let it keep blasting the keep to rubble." Tyrion nodded. "We'll lose everything if that thing breaks the entire structure. But how can we stop it?" Sansa drew a shaky breath. "We have a few heavy scorpions on the roof, the kind used to repel siege towers. We rigged them with dragon glass bolts. Maybe, just maybe, they can bring the dragon down." Jon's jaw set. "I'll go. Tormund, come with me. We'll try to man those scorpions and aim at the beast. Tyrion, stay with Sansa. Keep the keep secure. If the whites get in before we can stop that dragon." He didn't finish. They all understood the consequences. Tyrion's mind raced. He opened his mouth to protest but realized Jon was right. He couldn't help operate a siege weapon effectively. He was better served here, directing the final defense. Tormund growled, nodding. "Let's kill us a dragon," he said, grim humor in his tone. He glanced at Tyrion. "Don't die yet, dwarf. We'll have another drink after." Tyrion attempted a wry smile, though fear coursed through him. "I'll do my best." Jon and Tormund vanished up a nearby stairwell, followed by a few men. Sansa turned to Tyrion. "We have to prevent the whites from flooding these corridors. The crypts, some of the small folk are sheltering there. If the whites get in..." Tyrion remembered the stories that the dead buried in the crypts might even be raised if the White Walkers reached them. A shudder seized him. "We need to station men at every entrance to the crypts." She nodded. "I've sent Lady Mormont there with some of her best. She refused to cower while men fought above. Sansa's voice tightened with a strange mix of admiration and terror. I only pray it's enough. They hurried down a corridor that opened into a wide hall. Along the walls, a few battered defenders stood, swords in hand, ready for the first whites that might break through. Tyrion could see the heavy door at the far end, barred from the inside, leading out to the courtyard. Splintering noises came from behind it. The whites were close, pounding relentlessly. Some on the second floor dropped stones or poured heated oil from murder holes, but it barely slowed the undead. Tyrion heard a scuffle behind him. A white had slipped in through a side window, half shattered by the dragon's blasts. 2 soldiers lunged, hacking it down. More scraping of claws on stone. A swirl of panic threatened to overtake them. Tyrion drew a ragged breath, forcing calm. Barricade every window, he ordered. Archers on the second floor landing, keep watch over that corridor. The men leapt to obey. One soldier hammered planks over the broken window while another hoisted up a crossbow loaded with an obsidian-tipped bolt. The pungent smell of pitch lingered. Every step felt like the edge of a precipice. Through the keep's stone walls, they could still hear the undead dragon's roars. The entire fortress shuddered again, dust raining down. Tyrion imagined Jon and Tormund on the rooftop, desperately angling a scorpion, trying to line up a shot at a flying beast in the midst of swirling snow and gloom. The chance of success felt slim. If they failed, the dragon might tear the keep down tower by tower. Another roar, followed by a shriek of wind, made the floors tremble. Sansa grabbed Tyrion's arm to steady herself, eyes wide. It felt as though the end was upon them. The battered door at the end of the hall finally caved under the whites' assault. A tide of them spilled in twisted shapes in the partial darkness, eyes glowing. The defenders cried out. Arrows flew, spears thrust. Tyrion found himself side by side with Sansa. She held a short blade, face set in defiance. He had no time to protest her presence at the front. The whites clashed with the line of defenders. Some disintegrated under obsidian strikes, others drove forward, pushing men back. Screams filled the corridor. Tyrion stabbed a white that lunged at him, dust swirling as it collapsed. Another replaced it, an emaciated figure with a skull partially exposed. A soldier's sword took its head off. Cascading chaos reigned. The defenders tried to hold the line, but more whites poured in. A white walker appeared behind them, tall and malevolent. It raised an ice blade, pointing toward the living. Tyrion felt the temperature drop another degree, frost creeping over the stones. The defender's breath plumed in ragged gasps. Sansa stood behind them, blade in hand, though she looked pale as death. The walker advanced, stepping over the remains of its own minions. One soldier charged, spear extended, but the walker parried with inhuman speed, shattering the spear's obsidian tip with a contemptuous flick. In the same motion, it thrust its blade into the soldier's chest. The man screamed, turning to ice from within. Sansa made a small, horrified sound. Another soldier tried to flank the walker. Again, that ice blade flicked out, slicing through the man's neck. Tyrion realized how outmatched they were. 2 more whites lunged for him, and he slashed desperately, taking one down while the second latched onto his cloak. He stumbled, yelling. Sansa darted forward, hacking at the white's arm, severing it. It collapsed into a pile of dead flesh. He gasped, giving her a grateful look. She only nodded, eyes blazing with adrenaline. The White Walker pressed closer. Tyrion saw the glint of malice in its gaze. Behind it, whites kept pouring in. The defenders were losing ground. If the walker reached Sansa, Tyrion knew this corridor would be her grave. Desperate, he shouted, "Pull back to the next passage." Some men heard him, started retreating. But the walker advanced unrelentingly. Then an arrow whistled from somewhere up on the second-floor landing, piercing the walker's shoulder with a shard of obsidian. For an instant, the creature froze, a strange cracking noise emanating from within. Tyrion dared to hope. But the walker only hissed, turning its head to glare at the archer. The arrow had lodged in a patch of armor or an icy layer that blunted its effect. The walker was wounded but not destroyed. A thundering explosion overhead tore everyone's attention away. Tyrion felt the floor lurch as if something massive had struck the roof. Dust cascaded. Another roar, accompanied by what sounded like a monstrous shriek of pain. The undead dragon? Tyrion's mind spun. Could Jon have hit it? Light flared through a cracked window at the corridor's end. A burst of flame tinted gold. Tyrion's heart nearly stopped. Gold, not blue. For a moment, he thought it might be the flicker of the keep burning. Then the roar came again, a very different bellow, mighty, alive, filled with fury. A second shape descended from the clouds, enormous wings flapping, spouting orange fire. Tyrion recognized it instantly from the tails, a living dragon, large and dark, with spines along its back. Another shape soared behind it, smaller but still formidable, also breathing living flame. 2 living dragons. Daenerys Targaryen had arrived. Shouts of astonishment rippled through Winterfell. The whites in the courtyard momentarily paused, some incinerated as a jet of real dragon flame blasted downward. Tyrion heard an answering shriek from the undead dragon. The whole sky seemed to shake with the clash of these mythical beasts. Another fountain of orange flame lit the courtyard, and the whites outside were consumed in a swirling inferno. Through the broken door, Tyrion glimpsed silhouettes flailing in flames. The White Walker in the corridor jerked its head upward, momentarily distracted. That was all the opportunity the defenders needed. Another obsidian arrow found the walker's back. This time it sank deeper into the exposed ice flesh. A web of cracks spread across the walker's body, and it let out a hideous rasp. In an instant, it shattered into shards of ice. The whites around it collapsed, lifeless once more. A stunned hush filled the corridor. Then the defenders let out a ragged cheer. Tyrion's heart hammered. Above them, dragons roared and collided. Daenerys' 2 living dragons hammered the undead one with jets of flame. The undead beast screeched, belching its terrible blue fire in return. Through glimpses of the sky, Tyrion saw a furious aerial battle, streams of orange and blue flame crossing, wings buffeting. 1 living dragon soared overhead, swiping with massive claws. The undead creature twisted, half its wing membranes torn. They slammed into a tower near the keep's roof. Stones tumbled and a deafening crash echoed. But the living dragons pressed the attack. Inside the corridor, the whites that had collapsed didn't rise again. The White Walker's destruction had severed their link. Tyrion realized that each walker commanded a portion of the army. Removing even one was a victory. Relief flooded him, though the fight was far from done. Regroup, he urged the defenders. Check for more whites. Make sure they stay down. Sansa looked at him, breathless. Is that her? Tyrion nodded, swallowing. Daenerys Targaryen, unless I'm dreaming. She must have come north. And just in time. They needed no further urging. The living scrambled to press their advantage. Arrows soared from the second-floor windows, picking off still animated whites in the courtyard. Outside, in the swirling chaos of dragons, the tide shifted. Many whites had been incinerated by the sudden onslaught of real dragon fire. Others, lacking a White Walker's direct control, wandered aimlessly. Tyrion could see them through the broken doorway. The courtyard was a scorched ruin, flames licking at piles of bodies. Some whites still fought defenders who'd regrouped behind the new arrivals. A few figures in unfamiliar armor, likely Daenerys' Dothraki or Unsullied, engaged whites with exotic weapons, weaving skillfully. Emboldened, Winterfell's defenders rushed out to join them. Tyrion followed at a careful jog, with Sansa close behind. He spotted Jon and Tormund on the partial rooftop, cheering as one of Daenerys' dragons raked its claws across the undead creature's flank. The beast shrieked, battered but still flying. Another jet of orange flame engulfed its tail. The undead dragon reeled, spitting blue flame that clipped one of the living dragon's wings, but not enough to bring it down. They spiraled upward in a savage aerial dance. On the ground, pockets of White Walkers and whites still fought. Tyrion saw 2 White Walkers near the courtyard's far side, commanding a small cluster of whites that advanced on the newly arrived Unsullied. The Unsullied marched in tight formation, spears tipped with dragon glass. They chanted in a disciplined rhythm. White frost swirled around them as the walkers attempted to conjure their deadly cold. But the Unsullied pressed on, impaling whites with precision. One soldier thrust at a walker itself, the obsidian point connecting. A shiver of cracks spread across the walker's torso. It shattered. More whites fell, inert. Riders thundered through the destroyed gates, light cavalry wearing leathers, braids streaming, shrieking war cries. Dothraki, Tyrion realized. They slashed at whites with curved blades glimmering with dragaglass or coated in flaming oils. Bodies littered the ground. In mere minutes, the entire courtyard was transformed into a frenzied battleground shared by Northmen, wildlings, Unsullied, and Dothraki. Overhead, the dragons clashed in roars of flame. Winterfell's defenders, seeing unexpected allies at last, rallied with renewed vigor. Jon Snow leapt down from the roof's remains, joining the melee, Longclaw flashing. Tormund howled and charged a knot of whites. Lady Mormont led her Bear Islanders in a flanking strike against a second White Walker. The swirl of savage fighting forced Tyrion and Sansa to take cover behind a half-collapsed wall. Tyrion tried to keep track of the overall battle, but it was madness, fire, frost, roars, shrieks. A figure emerged through the chaos, tall and regal in riding leathers, silver hair whipped by the wind. Daenerys Targaryen. She dismounted from a wounded dragon, regal, Tyrion guessed, near the courtyard's edge where the beast sank to its belly, panting, hide scorched and clawed. She took in the scene with fierce eyes unsullied by hesitation. Another figure joined her, a knight with a bare sigil? Jorah Mormont, perhaps? They defended her from any wights that strayed close. The queen brandished a sword of her own, though Tyrion suspected she was more used to commanding from Dragaback. The alliance she had forged with Jon, or at least the cause to fight the undead, had finally borne fruit. Tyrion braved stepping forward, though Sansa tried to hold him back. "Stay behind the rubble," she hissed. But he shook his head. A small group of wights broke free from the melee, rushing at Daenerys from behind. Her dragon roared, trying to shield her, but it was wounded. Tyrion found a discarded bow near his feet, scooped it up. He notched an obsidian arrow. In a fluid motion, he fired. The arrow found the lead-white spine, destroying it. Two more wights lunged, but Jorah stepped in, slashing them with a Valyrian steel blade. They crumpled. Tyrion breathed out, relieved. Daenerys nodded in acknowledgement, though she likely didn't know who had fired that arrow. A flash of brilliant flame lit the sky overhead. The second living dragon, Drogon, engaged the undead beast again, biting at its neck. Blue flame spewed forth, charring Drogon's flank. The living dragon roared in pain but clung on, jaws clamping around the undead creature's throat. They tumbled in midair, a swirling mass of wings. Then Drogon exhaled a torrent of orange fire point blank. The undead dragon's neck erupted in blackened shards, and with a final piercing shriek, it broke apart, body dissolving into rotted flesh and ice crystals. Drogon flapped, staggering in the air as the remains of the undead beast plummeted to the ground in pieces. A thunderous crash shook the earth as those remains struck outside the castle walls. Some wights simply froze in place, as though they'd lost a crucial link. Others still fought, presumably commanded by White Walkers still alive. But the tide had turned. Daenerys' arrival had shattered the main thrust of the undead assault. One by one, White Walkers were cornered and destroyed by combined efforts of the living. Dragonglass spears, arrows, Valyrian steel. The wights they commanded fell inert. Gradually, the courtyard fell silent, littered with corpses of men and unspeakable undead. Smoke billowed from fires that had taken hold in various corners of the fortress. The keep's walls were partially ruined, stones blackened. But Winterfell still stood. Tyrion slumped against the rubble, heart hammering. The living had done it, or at least survived this onslaught. He and Sansa rose, stepping carefully among the fallen. Soldiers moaned, battered, some mortally wounded. Maesters emerged, frantic to give aid. Daenerys stood by her wounded dragon, tears of relief and pain in her eyes as she stroked its scaled neck. Drogon landed heavily in the courtyard, also wounded, but still formidable. Jon, Tormund, and others rushed up, breathless. Jon called out, "Is it done? Are they all gone?" A few last wights still twitched, awaiting final dispatch from steel. Soldiers moved through methodically, finishing them off. Far overhead, the sky had begun to lighten. A new day was dawning. Tyrion swallowed the lump in his throat, scanning for any sign of White Walkers. None seemed to remain. The reek of death was overwhelming, but the living had endured. Sansa placed a trembling hand on Tyrion's shoulder. We're alive." He nodded, too exhausted to speak. She gave him a watery smile, eyes shining with tears she refused to shed in front of the men. Tyrion patted her hand gently. Jon approached Daenerys, gazing at the battered fortress around them. Tormund limped, still bleeding from the spear wound, but grinning fiercely. Unsullied and Dothraki milled about, stoic or shell-shocked. Lady Mormont, her face streaked with blood, stood tall amid a cluster of Bear Island warriors. The yard was a scene of carnage, broken bodies, rubble, ashes from undead remains. Yet it was also a scene of victory. The White Walkers had come, and with them the undead dragon. They had smashed the walls, come within a hair's breadth of annihilating Winterfell, and now they were destroyed. Dawn spilled across the horizon, illuminating the shattered keep in pale gold. The surviving men and women from every corner of the realm stared at one another in disbelief that they still drew breath. Daenerys, chest heaving, turned to Jon. "We arrived as quickly as we could after hearing of the wall's fall. I only wish we'd come sooner." "You came in time," Jon said quietly, relief etched into his features. "Thank you." She exhaled, her gaze flicking to Tyrion as well. Recognition lit her eyes. She knew him from the Red Keep, from stories, from the rumor that the imp had fled north. Tyrion stepped forward, bowing slightly despite his battered condition. "Your Grace, you've saved us." "I am grateful." He almost smiled, ignoring the dryness of his throat. "We might have a chance now." A hush lingered. Then Daenerys turned her attention to the wounded Regal. "He'll need a skilled healer. Where's your maester?" Jon gestured for men to fetch Maester Wolkan. Others dragged themselves over to care for the wounded. Manderly emerged from the keep's corridor, battered but alive, rallying a rescue team to quench the fires still raging in the outer wards. The siege was over, but the aftermath was only beginning. Sansa approached Daenerys, inclining her head. "Thank you," she said softly, "for risking your dragons to save Winterfell." Daenerys met her gaze. "The true enemy was always the dead. I'm just relieved I arrived before it was too late. We lost many men on our march north, but we came as swiftly as the storms allowed. I had to see this through. If we had lost the north, all of Westeros might have followed." A raw, unspoken tension still simmered. Daenerys was queen by her own claim, and the north had crowned Jon. But after such a night, no one was eager to bicker over titles. The living had bled and triumphed together. Tyrion sensed that a new chapter lay ahead. The White Walkers were vanquished, at least those that had directly assaulted Winterfell. But was the entire threat destroyed? If the Night King was truly among those who fell, perhaps yes. Or perhaps pockets of undead remained. It was too soon to celebrate fully, but they had survived the longest night. Across the courtyard, the first sunlight touched the broken stones, glinting off the icy patches. Men and women sank to their knees, offering prayers or simply weeping from relief. Jon stood with Daenerys, Tormund, and others, surveying the devastation. Sansa moved among the wounded, her presence comforting. Tyrion found a spot on a chunk of fallen masonry and sat down heavily, dagger still clutched in his hand. He wiped the sweat and blood from his forehead, ignoring the sting of a cut on his cheek. Beyond the gates, half the ramparts were in ruins. The southwestern wall was a jagged silhouette. Smoke drifted across the courtyard. Bodies, human and white alike, lay in grotesque positions. Yet pockets of joy gleamed. A soldier embraced a friend he'd thought dead. A wildling clasped hands with a northerner. An unsullied warrior stood watch over a group of wounded Dothraki, protecting them while they rested. The final war had, at least in this corner of the world, found a measure of resolution. Tyrion closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the biting air. He thought of how improbable all this was: his defection to the north, Sansa's ascension to leadership, Jon's transformation from bastard of Winterfell to king in the north, and Daenerys Targaryen's arrival in the nick of time. So many pieces had woven together to create this dawn. If anything, it proved that the living, for all their flaws, could unite in the face of a threat to their very existence. He opened his eyes. Nearby, Sansa caught his gaze, and a small, tired smile curved her lips. He returned it, letting a tremor of relief pass through him. The sun's rays spread across the bloody snow, lighting the battered stones of Winterfell. For now, they stood victorious against the ultimate foe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The realm was still in tatters, the Iron Throne contested, alliances fragile. But they would face those battles as survivors of the long night, forging a new future from the ashes of the old. As the light strengthened, the chill wind abated, just slightly, as though acknowledging a turning point. Tyrion Lannister, once reviled in King's Landing, had found a place and, in his own small way, helped save the North from the dead. His breath billowed around him, ghostly and pale, yet charged with the promise of life continuing. The day was theirs, however costly. And for Tyrion, that was enough.